A horrific murder terrifies a community in New York.
I'd never seen anything as gruesome as this. The way the body was hacked up.
We didn't have hands where we could run fingerprints, and we didn't have a head.
What type of monster would do this?
Investigators quickly realize the details of the crime are disturbingly familiar.
We did have a serial killer that had dumped numerous bodies on Long Island.
That person had found an arm in his hedges in his front yard.
The next day, another arm is found about a half a mile away.
People were very nervous.
We're basically following a trail of body parts.
When detectives unravel the mystery, they find a killer who'd do anything to protect her secrets.
She doesn't know that I will chop her up and feed her to the dogs.
She just walked through neighborhoods tossing body parts.
That takes a void in your heart, in your soul, to do something like that, if you ask me.
It was just pure, unadulterated evil.
July 8th, 2014. In Bayshore, New York, two construction workers are taking a shortcut to the ferry through a wooded lot when they make a gruesome discovery.
As they were walking on the path, they came upon a female torso.
The body doesn't have a head. It doesn't have arms. And the legs have been removed from below the knee.
The horrified men immediately call 911. Homicide detectives rush to the scene.
My first impressions when I saw the body was, what type of monster would do this?
The torso was almost face down, maybe leaning a little bit to its right side. It had a pair of shorts on and a bra.
Never seen anything as gruesome as this. The way the body was hacked up.
There wasn't any blood around the body, so, okay, looks like this body was dumped here.
The body was in fairly good condition, meaning it hadn't been dumped there a long time ago. Especially, we're talking about a July day where it was 80 degrees that morning. The decomposition would go rapidly.
With only a dismembered torso, determining the victim's identity proves to be difficult.
We didn't have hands where we could run fingerprints. We didn't have a head. So it's very important to make sure you have everything documented well. Within close proximity, there were some bungee cords that, seemed out of place. Those bungee cords were recovered. But then it was discovered that the legs were just maybe 20 feet west of the body. They were hacked off. And like I said, on the leg you could see the tattoos.
One of them said Angel, and the other one looked like a GT on the opposite leg.
Investigators photograph the tattoos and enlist the aid of the media to find who they belong to.
As you can imagine, every media outlet was covering this story, including ours. It's not every day you cover a murder like this.
The following morning, they receive a tip from halfway around the world.
Police get a call from a man, Dale Brown, all the way from Guyana. He thinks that the body parts found may be that of his wife, Chanel.
Dale Brown says Chanel has been living and working in the United States while they made plans for him and their children to join her.
We decided that, she would go until we understand the whole immigration process, how the family could be together. We try to do the check-in in the morning and in the night kind of thing with the children.
Dale tells police the last time he spoke to Chanel was on the morning of July 5th.
I was calling her and I wasn't getting on to her. And I sent a few text messages and they were unanswered.
When detectives ask Dale if Chanel has any distinguishing marks, he says she does.
Dale tells detectives Chanel has 3 tattoos, one on each leg. One says CT, the other says Angel, and one on her arm that has her name, Chanel.
Upon looking more closely at the tattoo that was on one of the legs, it could have been a CT. He sent me pictures, and at that point, it looked like we had a tentative ID.
He confirmed it's my wife. That sadness, you know, it was so thick. It's like the air just changed.
Chanel Thompson was born November 6, 1986, in the country of Guyana.
Beautiful Guyana. We're the only English-speaking country on the continent of South America. Chanel grew up in Cumberland, Berbice. That's in the countryside. The culture in those communities, it's all about family.
Everyone is like very social with each other. Everybody know everybody.
Chanel was very friendly, very affectionate.
She had a wonderful upbringing, and even though she had a great life there, there's always kind of this dream for people in the Caribbean that they want to come to America.
Chanel's father worked hard to give the family a chance to make their American dreams come true.
When he migrated to the U.S., he made sure all his children would ultimately join him.
Chanel was 19 and still waiting for her turn to go when she met the man who would keep her heart in Guyana.
I was with some friends at Popular Creek. I saw her smiling at me, right? And I went across and I asked, I said, is this seat taken, right? Well, the seat had water. So I said no, and I go sit down in the water. You know, she laughed. Like I didn't even see the water, to be honest, right? I just saw her. We were young, trying to get ourselves established. You know, I loved her approach to life. You know, she was very smart. She always challenged my thinking, and she knew how to make me laugh.
Within a year of dating, Dale and Chanel found out she was pregnant.
We knew that we started this journey together, that we're in this together, and the only right thing to do is to get married. So I proposed. We got married in Guyana at the church that we attended together. Yeah, I remember that day. It was a good day.
Soon after the birth of their daughter, Gabrielle, Chanel's father sent word that her visa had been approved.
Once you get that visa, you have to travel at a certain time. We had to make the difficult decision for her to go, and Gabrielle would stay with me. We didn't want the opportunity to be lost. Her father said she needs to stay and have a stable job here in the U.S.
For the next several years, Chanel traveled between the two countries and gave birth to 3 more children.
She moved to New York, where she stayed with her sisters. Meanwhile, Dale remained in Guyana, where he cared for their 4 children.
Her ambitions were tied to family goals, and it was tied to her children and the life that she wanted to have for them.
Daddy always tells her that she only wanted the best for us.
In 2013, they began making plans for Dale and the children to join her.
We kind of mapped out, you know, what needed to be done to immigrate to the U.S. It's such a lengthy process, you know.
But the long-awaited family reunion would never take place. Instead, Chanel has become the victim of a horrific murder, and Suffolk County Police are trying to determine why.
This body being dismembered, just this level of viciousness that comes to mind. Who would do something like this?
To residents of the waterfront community, the details of the murder are alarmingly familiar.
just 3 years ago when we had these same headlines coming out about the Gilgo Beach murders and body parts being found.
We did have a serial killer that had dumped numerous bodies on Long Island.
It was obviously a consideration of ours, whether there's any connection to Gilgo.
Coming up, more body parts turn up.
A person had found what appeared to be an arm in his hedges in his front yard.
Detectives must act quickly to determine if a serial killer has struck again.
They discover one body, then another body, and then all of a sudden we have 4 bodies that turn up.
The murder and dismemberment of Chanel Brown bears the hallmarks of the unidentified Gilgo Beach serial killer. Searching for clues, detectives review the case files of the previous Gilgo victims.
It all started actually during an investigation looking for this girl who had gone missing. In the course of trying to locate her, we started coming across bodies. And they discover one body, then another body, and then all of a sudden we have 4 bodies that turn up.
2010 to 2011, police began finding more and more body parts near Gilgo Beach, mainly sex workers, women in their 20s. So when Chanel was killed, that brought that all back up.
Though it's been 3 years since the Gilgo Beach crimes, search teams sweep the area for Chanel's remains. But a call from a neighboring county redirects the investigation.
The day after the discovery of the body, I was tasked to go to Hempstead, where a call had been made that a person had found what appeared to be an arm in his hedges in his front yard. He believed it to be that of a female because her fingernails were long.
The arm lacks distinguishing features, so detectives are unable to confirm it belongs to Chanel Thompson Brown.
The next day, another arm is found about a half a mile away. It's an arm that has a manicure that matches the manicure from the first.
And we could connect that almost immediately to Chanel because the arm that was found had a tattoo with her name on it.
You can imagine in that neighborhood, the fear, people wondering what is going on.
But the more investigators analyze the Gilgo Beach serial killer, the less they believe Chanel is his latest victim.
When looking at the body, it appeared to have been hacked brutally, not with precision, but in haste and quite violent. I would not think a serial killer would do this. He'd be a little bit more careful.
The 2 limbs were also found outside the killer's usual dumping grounds.
It just didn't appear, due to several factors, that this was related to Gilgo Beach.
They had to actually put out a press release to tell people, no, we do not believe this is the Gilgo Beach killer. We do not believe that this is happening again.
The official announcement does little to calm area residents, and police are now left with the possibility of a copycat.
People were very nervous. You know, the department was under a lot of pressure. But I'm gonna be honest with you, we're so focused on our investigation that we kind of block out the outside noise and focus on what we have to do.
As of July 10th, now we had the torso, both legs, and both arms, and the only substantial part of the body that we were missing was the head.
We're basically following a trail of body parts.
With little indication as to who might have killed Chanel, detectives look to the autopsy for new leads.
During the autopsy, it was discovered that she had 39 stab wounds to her body.
With those type of injuries, my first thought is this is up close and personal. There's rage there, there's passion there. I feel at first glance, this victim knew who the perpetrator was.
Investigators contact Chanel's husband, Dale Brown, for a more complete victimology. Dale tells them that for the past year, she'd been working for a large Manhattan department store.
Chanel loved her job, and if she could have worked overtime to make an extra dollar, she did that.
She wasn't a person that went out partying at all. She was more or less a homebody.
With her busy schedule, Chanel's only social outlet were the people she worked with. Dale says she became friends with a woman named Leah Cuevas.
Leah, she was pretty friendly. She was bubbly, I would say. She always had a Bible with her that I saw. She was just a fun person.
She was also from an immigrant background. She was Trinidadian and Chanel was from Guyana. So they had that connection between them and it formed a bond.
Her husband is Dominican and he owned the bodega in the neighborhood.
They had this life that they were building together. And of course, you can imagine that Chanel was ultimately looking for that for her and Dale and their children.
Leah understood the struggles of immigrant life and offered to help by renting Chanel a room in her Brooklyn brownstone at a discount.
She was paying about $400 for rent, and which included utilities. $400 for rent. I mean, that's unheard of. That is a deal that no one would ever want to pass up in New York, where rents are so high.
Leah was offered the opportunity, and she jumped on it.
Leah lived in the same building, just downstairs. This caused the two of them to grow really close.
But Dale says something changed shortly before Chanel was killed.
The day before she was murdered, she told me that there was an incident with her, an argument with her and Leah, and that she wanted to move. But she didn't share much in terms of the details.
Investigators travel to the Brooklyn apartment building where Chanel and Leah both lived. Leah isn't there, so they speak to some of the other residents.
She lived on the second floor of a brownstone. Leah Cuevas lived downstairs from her. And there was another couple that rented down the hallway from her, a Jamaican couple.
I located the couple that she resided with on the second floor apartment regarding what took place over the past weekend.
Witnesses say that Leah and Chanel, they had an argument so huge that police were called.
Then it was discovered that Leah Cuevas was posing as if she owned the building and charging people rent, and it came out that she didn't own it.
At this point, Leah Cuevas was looking as our #1 suspect at that time.
July 10th, 2014. 2 days into the investigation, detectives have their first substantial lead in the brutal murder and dismemberment of Chanel Brown. According to the couple who lives down the hall, trouble had been brewing for some time between Chanel and Leah Cuevas.
I learned that initially Chanel had rented a room with the belief that Leah was the landlord or owner of the property.
Apparently, Leah Cuevas was not the landlord and had no right to receive any payments or monies.
The neighbors say they knew Leah was cheating them, but didn't know details about the situation and agreed not to tell Chanel under duress.
Leah Cuevas, we learned, also had control over the other tenants in the building. The one source of electric ran through her apartment. So at any given time, if she was mad, she had the power to just unplug that electricity.
But when Leah began to demand more money, they changed their minds.
He refused to pay, and Leah kept on harping on it. And at that point, the neighbors disclosed to Chanel that Leah was not the property owner.
She also found out that she was being charged more than the other people in the building because she was the only one who didn't know.
When Chanel learned of this information, she was mortified because she was wondering, how could a friend of mine a supposed friend, take such advantage of her?
The neighbors say Chanel couldn't afford to move out immediately, so for the next 2 weeks, she kept the upsetting revelation to herself. But on the 4th of July, Leah pushed her to the breaking point when she shut off the electricity.
The power was shut off in the residence, and Chanel got upset because she was getting ready to go to work, so she wound up getting into an argument with Leah.
Chanel was accusing Leah of scamming her, of taking advantage of her, telling her that she knew that she wasn't the landlord.
Upstairs, the other tenants listened as the fight escalated.
Chanel and Leah were so close at one time that they shared intimate details about their lives. Leah shared with Chanel that she had an affair with another man. This apparently was brought up in front of Leah's husband.
Leah became enraged.
Leah was out of control and yelling obscenities and just threatening her left and right.
It got heated to the point where the New York City Police Department had to be called, and once they arrived, they were separated, and the situation was resolved for the day.
At that point, Chanel left and went to work, but Leah wasn't done with her.
The neighbors tell detectives that the fight continued the next day.
They said that they were coming home, walking down the block. They saw Chanel walking towards the residence with their shopping cart with her laundry in it.
Later, when they got inside, they saw her laundry cart and her slippers in front of Leah's door. They also heard yelling as they were going upstairs.
They overheard Chanel basically screaming in a scared voice, saying, oh no, I'm sorry. And then they heard what sounded like a physical altercation. And then after several minutes, it went quiet.
When the neighbors went out later that day, they saw something strange.
They say they no longer saw Chanel's slippers or the laundry cart. What they did see was Leah mopping the floor with what smelled like bleach.
Based upon the information, we were able to obtain a search warrant for the residence. Blood was found in the hallway, just inside the front door, and then also in the front living room. There were a couple of empty bleach bottles, rubber gloves, a carpet cleaner, and odor eliminator products that were located in the garbage cans in front of the house.
Although it's clear Leah attempted to get rid of evidence, the scene is not consistent with what detectives know happened to Chanel.
Chanel was stabbed 39 times. That will cause a lot of blood. Plus, the dismemberment of a body would cause additional blood. To find what we found didn't make sense.
Police know that Leah is likely the last person who saw Chanel alive, so speaking to her is top priority.
Leah showed up at the local precinct. She was looking to speak to somebody to clear her name because she had heard that the police had been at her house.
Leah is adamant that she is the owner of the building and says she has the paperwork to prove it. She also tells police that she didn't kill Chanel and that the two of them were friends.
Due to the highly publicized nature of the crime, investigators decide to confront Leah with everything they know. Surprisingly, she acknowledges the recent fight.
She admitted she was pissed off at Chanel because Chanel was basically putting her business out there, especially in front of her husband.
She was quite proud that she beat her up, and yes, there could be a little blood in the apartment from that fight.
But according to Leah, Chanel was very much alive afterward.
Leah stated that she left on her own accord, and she left with some Jamaican man, intimating that she may have a relationship with this man.
She also tells police that she was having affairs and was basically running around town, and that if anything happened to her, that it was likely that Jamaican man that she left with. Leah is adamant that Chanel wasn't this good girl that everybody makes her out to be.
Coming up, Security cameras provide a glimpse of Chanel just before she disappeared.
She's seen leaving the laundromat and heading in the direction of her residence.
And investigators zero in on a cold-blooded killer.
This was the moment that the media was waiting for, that someone had been arrested in Chanel Brown's killing.
After concluding their interview with Leah Cuevas, police begin searching for Chanel's alleged lover. If what Leah told them is true, he was the last person to see Chanel alive.
Family members were interviewed, people in the building were interviewed, co-workers were interviewed.
They all had the same story, that she was a devoted wife and mother who worked hard, and that her only goal was to bring her family to the U.S.
While those close to Chanel insist she was faithful, they say she did have a male friend she might have asked to help her move.
The only Jamaican male that they knew that Chanel would be in contact with was a gentleman who was a taxi driver who would regularly give her rides. I was able to track him down, and he offered some compelling information.
The Jamaican cab driver says he and Chanel were strictly platonic.
He said on the morning of July 5th, the day that Chanel went missing, Chanel told him that she was going to do laundry later in the afternoon, and then she was going to go to the mall, and she wanted the driver to pick her up when she was done. He tried to call her between 8:30 and 9 o'clock that night and got no answer. A couple hours later, he got a response back saying, "I'm in the hospital with a friend." And that was the last contact that he had whatsoever with Chanel or her phone.
The message suggests Chanel could have left as Leah claimed, but detectives can't locate anyone who saw Chanel after July 5th. To establish a timeline of Chanel's movements, detectives ask nearby businesses for security footage.
Video was recovered from a laundromat right down the street from where Chanel lived.
She's seen leaving the laundromat with the shopping cart, heading in the direction of her residence, which was only about a block away. What was interesting is that the clothing that Chanel was wearing in the video was the same clothing that was discovered with her dismembered body.
Contrary to Leah's story, there is no evidence of Chanel ever leaving the apartment again.
We had a sense that Leah Cuevas was indeed our perpetrator, but now we had to prove it. In the ensuing days after the arm was found, detectives had responded once again to the Hempstead area.
The owner of the home saw blue jays picking at something inside the hedgerow. It turned out to be the victim's head.
When the head was discarded, it was discarded in hedges, so it never made it to the ground. So the head never had an opportunity to get decomposed that you would think it would. I've seen a lot of things, but it takes a void in your heart or your soul to do something like that.
Although the gruesome discovery lends another piece of evidence, it leaves lingering questions.
We still weren't 100% sure where this crime had occurred. We knew the argument was, in fact, in Leah Cuevas' apartment, but we didn't recover a lot of blood.
At this point, police are able to pull Leah's cell phone records, and practically every single body part matched up to her locations.
On July 6th, Leah's cell phone was located in the town of Hempstead, where the arms and head had been discovered. And it's heading off of a cell phone tower right next to the Hempstead train station.
In that vicinity is the Long Island Railroad, which is a major artery to get to and from New York City.
Police are stunned by the possibility that a killer used public transit to dispose of a dismembered body.
We believe she got off the train and just walked through neighborhoods and tossing body parts in different locations.
It's kind of one of those things that makes you wonder, this couldn't be something that just a normal person would do, right? This had to be the work of someone more sinister.
Leah was under the illusion that she had committed the perfect crime and the perfect cover-up. I was convinced that it was the devil himself, through her, using her to do this.
After 2 weeks of investigation, Bayshore detectives have used phone records to connect Leah Cuevas to the murder and dismemberment of Chanel Brown.
On July 23rd of 2014, Leah Cuevas was arrested and charged with murder in second degree.
This was the moment that the media was waiting for, made headlines, it was all over the news.
Leah exercises her right to remain silent.
2 days after Leah's arrest was made, I receive a call, and it's from a taxi union official in New York City who tells me that he has a driver who may have pertinent information to Chanel's case.
So I asked my wife if she could turn the TV off, and she didn't hear me, so I turned around and got smacked in the face with Leah being brought into the police station. She was in handcuffs.
Ernesto says he remembers driving Leah to Long Island the day before Chanel's body was discovered.
I got the call about 7:35 in the morning on July 7th, where she was asking me what would it cost to take her to Brentwood.
He went to Brooklyn to pick Leah up. When Leah came to his car, she had a very large suitcase. It was so large and heavy that Ernesto had to help her place it in the car. He estimated it to weigh 80 to 100 pounds.
I asked her, jokingly, I said, "What do you have here, a body?" She didn't joke, she just said no, and then very stoic. She asked me if I knew of any pawn shop, and she's like, "Just drive to the pawn shop, and then we'll guide from there."
Ernesto says that after taking her to the pawn shop, Leah directed him to Bayshore.
Eventually they get to a house, and at that point, he helps Leah take the suitcase out of the trunk, and nobody was home at the time, and they leave the suitcase there and go back to the car.
We just returned to Brooklyn, but instead of dropping off at her house, she asked me to drop her off at the train station, which I did.
Ernesto says Leah was completely calm throughout the trip, but he recalls an unsettling moment.
She mentioned that she had an argument with her neighbor, and she's like, she doesn't know that I will chop her up and feed her to the dogs. I replied to her like, "Come on, Leah, that's not something you would do." How little did I know.
I happened to have worked there as a patrol officer many years earlier, so I was familiar with the area, and at that point, it seemed with the information that Ernesto was providing that they had gone to Elliott Street. So just on a hunch and reviewing Leah's cell phone records, there was a call made to a Fady Jacques who happened to live on Elliott Street. We knock on the door, I think it was a day or two later, and interview Fady Jacques.
Fayette says he and Leah are old friends and remembers getting a call from her on July 7th. The call was placed about an hour after Ernesto says he dropped Leah off at the Brooklyn train station.
Leah had asked him if he was home, and he told her that he was at work, that he worked at Home Depot. And she asked if he could pick up some bungee cords for her, at which time he did. That was significant because bungee cords fitting that description were at the scene of where those body parts were dumped.
Fayette says Leah was waiting for him when he got home. She had a large suitcase with her and asked him for a ride to Bayshore.
When he went upstairs to get the keys for the car, by the time he came outside, he notices that the bungee cords that he had just given Leah were tied around the suitcase. She directs them to a parking lot. They pull into the parking lot, and he assists her with taking the suitcase out of the trunk. He knows that her sister lives in the area, so he thinks that she's going to visit somebody. So he leaves. He said 10, 15 minutes later, he gets a call from Leah, and she's telling him to come back and pick me up. So he thought it was kind of odd.
Fayette says when he returned, the suitcase was gone.
He wound up taking Leah to the Brentwood Railroad Station so she could go back home.
Despite giving Leah a ride, Fayette had no knowledge of or involvement in the crime, so police let him go. After interviewing Fayette, detectives visit the pawn shop and discover further evidence of Leah's cover-up.
Leah had pawned some items of jewelry, in particular a ring. This was, it appears to have paid for the cab ride. That ring was eventually matched to belonging to our victim, Chanel Thompson Brown.
3 months after Leah's arrest, as prosecutors are preparing the case for trial, they receive a call from the rightful owner of Leah and Chanel's apartment building.
She was renovating that apartment, and she had pulled up a rug and noticed what appeared to be a bloodstain.
I made arrangements to have our identification section and crime lab come, and they cut out this section of the carpet and the padding, and eventually, once it was analyzed, it came back to being blood belonging to Chanel.
We had finally found our crime scene for a fact.
But you never know what a jury's going to do. There was no eyewitness to this. There was no confession. We have to connect all the dots, and we have to paint a picture for the jury of what happened here.
In December 2015, Leah Cuevas stands trial for the murder and dismemberment of Chanel Brown.
With these cases where you're dealing with circumstantial evidence, you're always concerned with, are you going to be able to paint a picture for the jury that is strong enough to convict someone of murder?
$400 a month for rent. It doesn't seem like enough to kill someone and to carry out such a vicious and just almost depraved act of chopping them up and then discarding their body parts.
The prosecution argues that it was a crime of passion.
Chanel brought up that Leah was being unfaithful to her husband, and she brought this up in front of Leah's husband.
The real reason that she snapped was because Chanel outed her.
It shamed her and infuriated her, and she took that out on Chanel when she had the next opportunity to.
It is one thing to, in the heat of the moment, to maybe stab somebody, but 39 times is crazy.
Prosecutors say Leah used both acquaintances and public transportation to distribute the dismembered body parts in various locations.
Think about if you were sitting next to her on the train. It takes a whole other level of evilness to dismember a body. And then to discard the body parts.
The defense attempts to undermine the prosecution's argument.
Maybe she wasn't on the train to dismember, to distribute body parts. Maybe she was going to the mall. Maybe she had a friend in Hempstead.
I know defense lawyers got their job to do. You got to defend the indefensible. But my God, it was preposterous to say the least.
On December 15th, the jury finds Leah Cuevas guilty. During the sentencing hearing, she finally takes the stand.
She showed no remorse. She basically was saying that we set her up.
She told the judge that she felt like a lamb being led to slaughter. Once she finished her mini tirade, the judge said to Leah, the only lamb being led to slaughter in this case was Chanel. And then he sentenced her to 25 years to life.
She got every year that she deserves.
She is sitting where she is right now because there's evidence of justice in this world.
It's unfathomable to think that somebody would be capable of doing what she did.
It was just pure, unadulterated evil. I mean, if you didn't think that evil exists, this epitomized it.
This story, when you really think about it, it's a woman who came to America in search of the American dream for her children and her husband. And in the end, now we have 4 children left without a mother.
She was more than this case, more than the gruesomeness that makes this case sensational. She was a loving, caring mother and wife, sister, aunt, human being.
Me doing my schoolwork and following something that I want to do and I'm passionate about is something that she would have been proud of. I feel like seeing the twins grow up and it's something that Mama would have wanted to see.
She loved our children, and I know she would be very proud of them and their achievements. Yes. She was a beautiful soul.
It begins with something so small no one thought to remember it clearly. A door closing, not slammed,
Not forced.
no splintered wood, no echo of violence. Just a quiet, deliberate click, soft enough to disappear into the background noise of New York City. Sirens wailing somewhere far off, tires hissing over wet asphalt, a television murmuring behind thin apartment walls. The city never sleeps, and it never listens. But sometime between 11:17 p.m. and midnight, in October of 1993, that one sound, barely audible, almost polite, became the last confirmed trace of Daniel Hargrove. And then he was gone. 37 years old. Financial analyst.
Stable job.
Predictable life. No criminal history.
No debts.
No known enemies. The kind of man who blends into the city so completely he might as well be part of the architecture, present but never noticed. Neighbors described him the same way.
Quiet. Reserved. Routine-driven.
The kind of person who says hello in elevators and disappears behind a closing door without leaving an impression. That's what made it so easy to assume nothing was wrong. Until morning came. At 8:42 a.m., his office placed the first call. He hadn't shown up. That alone wasn't alarming. People run late, people call in sick, but Daniel didn't do that. By 10:15, a second call. No answer. By noon, concern turned into something sharper. A colleague made the trip across town, climbed the narrow stairwell, and knocked on his door. No response. No movement. No sound. At 2:15 p.m., the landlord unlocked the apartment. And just like that, an ordinary living space became something else entirely. Not a crime scene. Not officially. There was no blood. No signs of struggle. No broken furniture. No forced entry. No overturned drawers. Everything was still, as if time had paused mid-breath. A glass sat on the coffee table, half full. Not spilled. Not disturbed. The television was off, but plugged in. Shoes neatly placed by the door. A jacket hanging where it always hung. Wallet resting on the counter. But the keys were gone. That detail would linger, quiet but persistent, like a question no one could answer. If Daniel left on his own, why take the keys but nothing else? If someone took him, why leave everything behind? The first officers on scene treated it as routine. Adults disappear. New York has a way of swallowing people whole. Voluntary disappearance. Walk away. It happens more often than anyone likes to admit. But something didn't sit right. Not with the landlord, who insisted Daniel would never leave without notice. Not with the colleague, who described him as obsessively consistent. Not with the woman across the hall, who would later say she heard something that didn't make sense.
A door.
That same door. Closing.
Softly.
She remembered the time only because she was awake, reading under a dim lamp. The building had settled into its usual nighttime rhythm. Pipes knocking, footsteps fading, televisions lowering in volume. Then suddenly that sound. Not loud. Not alarming. Just precise. She didn't think much of it then. But later, when she tried to recall it, something felt wrong. Detectives would return to her statement again and again, picking it apart, searching for anything that might anchor it in reality. "Did you see anyone?" they asked. She hesitated. "I looked through the peephole," she said eventually. "I thought I saw him." A pause. But something felt off. She couldn't explain what that meant. Not clearly. Not in a way that translated into evidence. Just a feeling. A subtle wrongness that lingered long after the memory itself began to fade. By the second day, the case shifted. Missing person. By the third, it shifted again. Suspicious circumstances. Because locked doors don't open themselves. And people don't simply vanish from sealed apartments without leaving behind something. Anything that tells a story. But this place told nothing. The locks were intact. No signs of tampering. Windows closed from the inside. Fire escape untouched. No secondary exits. No hidden access points. Whoever entered that apartment did so without force. Or they were never an intruder at all. The building was canvassed. 42 units. Dozens of interviews. Most residents reported nothing unusual. The night had passed like any other. Except for 3 accounts. A man on the 3rd floor claimed he heard voices, 2 of them low, almost whispering. He couldn't make out words, only the cadence of conversation. It didn't strike him as important at the time. A woman on the 2nd floor described footsteps in the hallway long after midnight. Not hurried, not heavy, slow, measured, as if someone was pacing deliberately, counting distance rather than covering it. And then there was the neighbor across from Daniel's door. The one who heard it close. The one who saw something she couldn't explain. No cameras captured the hallway. In 1993, surveillance was limited, inconsistent, often non-existent in residential buildings like this. The city moved faster than its ability to record itself. So investigators turned outward. Daniel's life. His work. His habits. His secrets. But there weren't supposed to be any. Bank records showed no irregularities. No hidden accounts. No unexplained withdrawals. His job performance was steady, unremarkable. No conflicts with coworkers. No disciplinary issues. No sudden changes in behavior. Phone records revealed routine patterns. Calls to family.
Calls to work.
Nothing out of place. Until one call broke the pattern. 10:53 p.m. Outgoing. 47 seconds long. The number wasn't saved. It didn't belong to anyone in his known circle. It traced back to a public payphone 3 blocks from his apartment. Investigators located the booth. It stood on a dim corner, half lit by a flickering street lamp, the kind of place people passed without noticing. Fingerprints were lifted, but smudged, incomplete, useless. No witnesses came forward. But the timing mattered. Because roughly 20 minutes later, the neighbor heard the door. That quiet final click. The theory formed quickly, almost instinctively. Someone called Daniel, arranged something, came to the apartment, and then left with him. But theories collapse under pressure. Why no struggle? Why no raised voices? Why leave the wallet, the jacket, everything that suggested permanence? And the question that refused to go away. Why did no one see them leave? Days stretched into weeks. The case gained attention, then lost it. Tips flooded in, most irrelevant, some absurd. Sightings reported across the city. A man resembling Daniel boarding a subway. Another seen walking near the river late at night. None confirmed. None credible. The city moved on. But the file didn't close. It thickened. Notes layered over notes. Statements cross-referenced. Possibilities explored, dismissed, revisited. Detectives circled the same questions again and again, as if repetition might force the truth into existence. And then, just when the investigation began to stall, when leads thinned and urgency faded, something arrived. Not evidence. Something stranger. A letter. Postmarked from within New York. No return address. Delivered directly to the precinct handling the case. Inside, a single sheet of paper.
Typed. Clean.
Untouched. It read, "You're looking in the wrong place." He didn't leave. He was taken where no one looks twice. No signature.
No explanation. Just that.
Detectives debated it endlessly. A hoax, most likely. Someone inserting themselves into the narrative. It happens. It always happens. But something about the wording lingered. He didn't leave. Not missing.
Not gone.
Taken. And that final line, where no one looks twice. It suggested familiarity. Not just with the case, but with the environment. With the city. With the blind spots people ignore every single day. They trace the postmark. A sorting facility. Thousands of letters processed. No way to isolate the origin. Another dead end. But the damage was done. The direction of the investigation shifted. Quietly.
Subtly.
Less focus on voluntary disappearance. More on intent. On selection. Because if Daniel Hargrove didn't leave, then someone made sure he couldn't. Months passed. Then years. Detectives rotated out. New ones inherited the file. Fresh eyes, same questions. The case cooled, slowly, inevitably, until it reached that familiar state. Archived but unresolved. A cold case. Not dead. Just waiting. Because somewhere beneath the surface, beneath decades of dust, beneath outdated methods and overlooked connections, something remained. Something that didn't fit. Something that refused to disappear. And years later, when technology evolved, when old evidence was re-examined under a harsher, more revealing light, Daniel Hargrove's disappearance would resurface. Not as a forgotten mystery, but as the beginning of something far more disturbing. Because the deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became. Daniel Hargrove was never just a missing person. He was part of a pattern no one had seen. A pattern hiding in plain sight. For years. The file didn't feel cold when it was opened again. It felt unfinished. Dust lifted from the cardboard edges as if disturbed too early, like something that had been waiting. Not forgotten, not buried, just paused. The name on the tab had faded slightly over the years, but it was still readable. Daniel Hargrove. 1993. Missing. The kind of case that blends into archives by the hundreds. The kind that gets summarized in a single sentence and filed away under unsolved. But this one didn't sit right the moment it was pulled. Not because of what it contained, but because of what it didn't. Detective Laura Mendel was the one who reopened it. She didn't start with instinct. She started with data. In the early 2010s, a digitization initiative swept through old case files across New York, feeding decades of reports, interviews, and evidence logs into searchable systems. Patterns that once required human memory could now surface through algorithms, connections hidden not by complexity, but by time. And something surfaced. Not a match. Not exactly. More like an echo. 3 cases. Different years. Different boroughs. No official link. Each classified separately. Each unresolved. But when laid side by side, they began to align in ways that felt deliberate. Single male victims. Ages between 30 and 45. Stable employment. No criminal history. No known enemies. All last seen inside their own residences. No signs of forced entry. No signs of struggle. Personal belongings left behind. And in 2 of the cases, keys missing. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was enough to reopen Daniel Hargrove. Mendel didn't announce it, didn't escalate it. She simply pulled the file, digitized what hadn't yet been processed, and began reading. Page after page. Statement after statement. Looking for inconsistencies, for anything overlooked. The neighbor's account caught her attention first. I thought I saw him, but something felt off. That line. It had been dismissed as uncertainty. Human memory under stress. But Mendel read it differently. Not uncertainty. Recognition interrupted. She tracked down the original interview transcript. The full version, not the summarized report. And buried deeper in the questioning, something else emerged, something that hadn't made it into the official narrative. Was there anything specific that felt off? The officer had asked. A pause. Then, the way he stood. Not the face, not the clothes, the posture. He didn't shift his weight like he usually does. Daniel always leaned slightly to one side, like his left foot bothered him. But this was straight. Too straight. That detail had gone nowhere in 1993. But in a pattern analysis, posture mattered. Mendel flagged it. Then she moved to the phone call. 10:53 p.m. 47 seconds.
Payphone.
In the original investigation, the assumption had been simple. Someone contacted Daniel, arranged a meeting, possibly lured him out. But he hadn't left. So, what if the call wasn't an invitation? What if it was confirmation? She pulled records from the other two cases. Different years. Same anomaly. Short outgoing calls. Under a minute. Routed to public payphones within walking distance. Not identical, but close enough to suggest intention. Someone didn't want to be traced. And someone wanted the victim to initiate contact. That changed the dynamic entirely. Because it meant control. Subtle. Structured.
Planned.
Mendel mapped the locations of the payphones, archival city data, outdated, but still accessible. Cross-referenced them with the victims' residences. Distances varied, but all within a radius that could be covered on foot in under 10 minutes. Close enough to feel safe. Far enough to avoid immediate suspicion. She leaned back, staring at the pattern forming slowly, piece by piece. This wasn't random. It was repeatable. And that meant it had likely been repeated more times than anyone realized. The problem was, in 1993, no one was looking for connections like this. Cases lived and died in isolation. But now, decades later, isolation itself was the illusion. Mendel expanded the search. Missing persons. Unsolved disappearances. Parameters tightened, male, 30 to 50, last seen at home, no forced entry, minimal disturbance. The system returned 12 possible matches. 12. Spread across nearly 2 decades. Some lacked complete data. Some deviated slightly. But the core pattern it held. She printed them all. Laid them out. Names, dates, addresses. And then she noticed something else. The gaps. 2 years here. 3 years there. Sometimes longer. Then shorter. Irregular intervals. But never overlapping. Whoever was responsible didn't rush. Didn't escalate. They waited. They selected. They executed. And then they disappeared again. No escalation of violence. No public displays. No bodies. That last detail stood out more than anything. No bodies. Not one. In over a dozen potential cases. That wasn't just caution. That was method. Complete removal. Mendel returned to the letter. You're looking in the wrong place. He didn't leave. He was taken where no one looks twice. At the time, it sounded cryptic. Now, it sounded specific. Where no one looks twice. Not hidden. Not remote. Overlooked. There's a difference. She started listing possibilities. Places people pass every day without noticing. Places that blend into the background of a city's constant motion. Maintenance areas. Service corridors. Utility spaces. Basements. Sublevels. Places that exist but don't register. Then she cross-referenced building blueprints, old permits, structural layouts. Many of the buildings tied to the cases shared something subtle but significant. Access points not commonly used. Service entrances. Internal stairwells disconnected from main traffic. paths that allowed movement without exposure. It wasn't proof,
but it was a map.
and for the first time, the case felt less like a disappearance and more like a system. A process refined over time. She brought it to her supervisor. Carefully. No conclusions. Just patterns. He listened. Nodded. Flipped through the pages. Circumstantial, he said finally.
It was.
But it was also consistent. And consistency over time becomes something harder to ignore. She was given limited clearance to proceed. Unofficially. Quietly. No task force. No press.
No announcements.
Just one detective following a thread no one else had pulled. Mendel revisited Daniel Hargrove's building. The hallway looked smaller than she expected.
Narrow. Dimly lit.
The kind of space where footsteps echo more than they should. She stood outside his old apartment door. Different tenant now. Different life. Same structure. She knocked. Waited. Nothing unusual. Just a door. Just a hallway. Just a place no one would look twice. Then she noticed it. At the far end of the corridor, partially obscured by a maintenance cart, was a door. Unmarked. Painted the same color as the wall. Easy to miss. She walked toward it. Opened it. Inside, a narrow stairwell descended into darkness. No security camera.
No motion sensor.
Just concrete steps leading down into a space that didn't belong to the visible part of the building. She paused. Not because it was surprising, but because it wasn't. This was exactly the kind of place the letter described. The kind of place people ignore. The kind of place someone could use repeatedly. Mendel didn't go down that day. Not yet. Instead, she stepped back into the hallway, closing the door behind her with the same quiet precision. A soft click. The sound echoed faintly. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like time folding in on itself. 1993.
A door.
Closing. Not slammed. Not forced. Just final. She returned to the file with something she hadn't had before. Direction. Because if this pattern was real, if Daniel Hargrove wasn't an isolated case, then somewhere in the city, hidden in plain sight, there was a path.
A route.
A method of movement no one had ever traced. And if that path still existed, then whoever used it might still be out there. Waiting. Watching. Counting steps. Just like before. Mendel didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear. Not because of excitement. But because the pattern, once seen, refused to fade. It lingered behind her eyes, replaying in fragments. Hallways, doors. Footsteps measured in silence. Men who disappeared without resistance. A system without witnesses. A method without noise. And somewhere inside that system, an entry point no one had ever fully examined. By morning, she wasn't chasing a missing man anymore. She was tracing movement. Not where Daniel Hargrove went, but how he was taken. The distinction mattered. She returned to the building before sunrise, when the city was caught in that narrow gap between exhaustion and renewal. Delivery trucks idling. Streetlights still flickering. A silence that didn't belong to New York, but appeared briefly, like a glitch. The hallway was empty. Same dim lighting. Same narrow stretch of worn carpet. Same door at the far end, blending into the wall, pretending not to exist. This time, she didn't hesitate. She opened it. The air inside was colder.
Stale.
Untouched by circulation. The kind of air that settles when spaces are used rarely, but not never. Concrete steps descended sharply, the sound of her shoes echoing faintly with each step, controlled, deliberate. Halfway down, she stopped. Listened. Nothing. No hum of machinery. No distant voices. Just the quiet weight of a place forgotten on purpose. She continued. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a narrow corridor. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling, low enough to force a slight hunch in posture. Electrical conduits. Water lines. Infrastructure, the skeleton of the building, hidden beneath its living surface. Places like this exist everywhere. And no one thinks about them. She moved slowly, scanning everything. Dust patterns. Scuff marks. Anything that suggested movement. Most of it looked undisturbed,
Old.
settled. But then she saw it. Near the corner where the corridor bent, there was a faint disruption in the dust. Not fresh, not recent, but different, as if something or someone had passed through at some point without leaving a clear trace.
À partielle absence.
She crouched, studying it. Too vague for forensics. Too subtle for certainty. But it was something. And in a case built on nothing, something mattered. The corridor split into two directions. One leading toward the boiler room. Locked, rusted, clearly unused. The other continued deeper, narrower, darker. She followed the second path. After about 20 feet, it ended at another door. Heavier, reinforced, no markings.
Locked.
She examined the handle. No visible damage. No signs of forced entry. But the lock itself newer than the surrounding metal. Replaced at some point. Recently? Hard to tell. She made a note. Then she stepped back, letting the silence settle again. If this space had been used in 1993, it had been cleaned, not professionally, not thoroughly, but enough to erase anything obvious. Enough to let time do the rest. But something about the layout stayed with her. Entry point. Descent. Controlled path. Exit unseen. She returned upstairs with more questions than answers, but for the first time, those questions had structure. Because if Daniel had been taken this way, if he had been moved through spaces no one monitored, then the disappearance wasn't sudden. It was guided. Planned.
Contained.
Back at her desk, Mendel expanded her scope again, not just victims, but buildings. She cross-referenced the addresses tied to the 12 potential cases with architectural records, old permits, maintenance logs, structural modifications. It took hours, then days. Then something clicked. Not all the buildings were identical, but many shared a specific design feature common in older New York constructions: integrated service corridors connecting utility areas between adjacent buildings. Originally intended for maintenance access, rarely documented in detail, often forgotten during renovations. A hidden network, not officially connected, but physically accessible. She overlaid the building maps, line by line, block by block, and slowly, a pattern emerged, not perfect, not continuous, but suggestive of something larger. A patchwork of pathways beneath the city. Not tunnels, not in the cinematic sense, but enough. Enough to move. Enough to disappear. Her pulse steadied as she followed the lines with her finger. If someone knew these routes, really knew them, they could move between buildings without ever stepping into the street.
No cameras.
No witnesses. No record. Just doors.
Stairs. Corridors.
And silence. She pulled the other case files again, this time focusing on building access. In 2 of the disappearances, maintenance staff had reported unlocked service doors the following day, dismissed at the time as oversight. In another, a tenant recalled hearing metal doors opening and closing late at night, like someone working, they said. All ignored. All written off. Individually meaningless. Together a pattern. Mendel leaned back, the weight of it settling in. This wasn't random selection. This was familiarity. Someone understood these buildings. Not just their public spaces, but their hidden ones. That narrowed the field. Maintenance workers. Contractors. Inspectors. Anyone with legitimate access to infrastructure areas. But decades had passed. Records were incomplete. People had moved, retired, disappeared. Still, she started compiling names. Anyone who had worked across multiple buildings tied to the cases. The list was long at first. Then it narrowed. Cross-referenced with employment timelines. Availability. Geographic overlap. Patterns of presence. Eventually, it came down to 3 names. 3 men who had worked maintenance routes across different boroughs during the relevant years. 2 were easy to eliminate. One had died in 2004. The other had moved out of state in the late 90s, with no connection to later cases. That left 1. No immediate red flags. No criminal record. No prior investigation. Just a name buried in maintenance logs. present in 6 of the 12 buildings, across a span of 15 years. Not continuously, but consistently enough to matter. Mendel stared at it. No dramatic realization.
No sudden certainty.
Just a quiet shift. Because for the first time, the case had something it had never had before. A person. Not a suspect. Not yet. But a possibility. And possibilities are where cold cases begin to breathe again. She didn't rush. Didn't confront. Didn't escalate. Instead, she kept digging. Background checks. Employment history. Residences. Patterns of movement. Everything she could access without alerting anyone. Because if this man was connected, if he had been operating undetected for years, then attention was risk. And risk could make him disappear. Just like the others. Days passed. Information accumulated. And slowly, a profile began to form, not of a monster, not of someone outwardly dangerous, but of someone invisible, reliable, consistent, trusted. The kind of person who moves through buildings without being noticed, who enters spaces without raising questions, who belongs everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Exactly the kind of person no one looks at twice. Mendel returned once more to Daniel Hargrove's building. Not to the apartment, not to the hallway, but to the door at the end of the corridor. She opened it, stepped inside, listened. Silence. Then she closed it again.
Softly.
A quiet click. And this time, she didn't just hear it. She understood it. Because that sound wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a path. One that had existed long before Daniel. One that may have been used again and again and again. Hidden beneath the surface. Waiting. Just out of sight. Where no one looks twice. The name didn't mean anything at first. No headline. No record flagged. No history that raised alarms. Just a line in maintenance logs. Elliot Vance. It sat there quietly, buried in decades-old paperwork, surrounded by service dates, boiler inspections, pipe repairs, routine entries from a life that never demanded attention. The kind of name that exists in systems without ever becoming part of a story. Until now. Mendel didn't rush to label him. That would have been a mistake. Cold cases collapse under assumption. Patterns can deceive. Coincidence can imitate design. But presence, repeated, consistent presence that demanded scrutiny. 6 buildings. 6 separate disappearances, loosely tied by time, method, and absence of evidence. And Elliot Vance had been there. Not always the same week. Not always the same month. But within a window close enough to matter.
Before.
Or just after. Never during. That detail stood out more than anything. Because it suggested awareness. Not reaction. She pulled everything she could find on him. Employment records first. Fragmented. Contract-based work. No long-term employer. He moved between companies, maintenance firms, independent contracts, subcontracted city work. The kind of employment structure that leaves behind traces, but no solid footprint. Addresses came next. He had moved frequently. Apartments across different boroughs. None stayed occupied for more than a few years. Nothing unusual on the surface. New York churns residents constantly, but combined with everything else, it felt deliberate. A man who didn't anchor. A man who passed through spaces the same way he worked in them. Quietly. Unnoticed. Mendel printed a photo from an old licensing file. It was dated, grainy. Late 30s, maybe early 40s at the time. Neutral expression. Nothing distinctive. The kind of face that blends into crowds. She studied it longer than she expected, trying to see something that wasn't there. Predators don't always look like predators. Sometimes they look like background. She cross-referenced his work logs with the timeline of Daniel Hargrove's disappearance. October 1993. There it was. 3 days before. Service call. Basement piping inspection. Signed off. Completed. No follow-up. No anomaly reported. Just another job. Except now it wasn't. Mendel circled the date. Then she leaned back, letting the weight of that alignment settle. 3 days before Daniel vanished, Elliot Vance had access to the building's internal structure. He knew the layout. He knew the entry points. He knew the spaces no one else thought about. And, if the pattern held, he had time to prepare. But preparation for what? There were still gaps. Critical ones. No direct evidence placing him inside Daniel's apartment. No witnesses identifying him. No physical trace connecting him to any victim. Just proximity. Repeated, calculated proximity. Enough to suggest. Not enough to prove. Mendel needed more. She expanded outward again, not just buildings, not just timelines, but behavior. If Vance was involved, if he had orchestrated these disappearances, then somewhere there had to be a mistake. A deviation. No system is perfect forever. She revisited the earlier cases, with his presence flagged. Line by line. Interview by interview. And then she found it. A statement that had been dismissed as irrelevant. In a case from 1998, a tenant described seeing a maintenance worker in the building late at night. Not unusual on its own, but the timing didn't match any scheduled work. He said he was checking a leak, the tenant had reported, but he didn't have any tools. Just a flashlight. The description was vague, but the detail that mattered wasn't the face. It was the behavior. Access without verification. Movement without question. The tenant hadn't reported it until days later, after the disappearance. By then, it was nothing. Now, it was something else entirely. Mendel pulled Vance's work log for that building.
He had been assigned there
2 days prior. No scheduled work on the night in question, which meant one thing. He returned. Unlogged. Unnoticed. The pattern sharpened. Preparation. Observation. Execution. Exit. No witnesses, because no one questioned his presence. No forced entry because doors were opened from the inside. No struggle because control was established before resistance could form. But one question remained, louder than all the others.
How?
How do you remove a person from their own home without noise, without resistance, without leaving a trace? Mendel stared at the files, searching for something, anything, that suggested method. And then her eyes returned to a detail she had almost overlooked. Medical history. In 2 of the cases, including Daniel's, there were minor references, doctor visits, prescriptions. Nothing serious, but something consistent. Sleep issues. Mild anxiety. Insomnia. Common conditions. Easily treated. Easily managed. Easily exploited. A possibility formed. Not confirmed, but plausible. If someone gained access. If someone introduced something. Not violently. Not obviously. Just enough to impair.
To disorient.
To reduce resistance. It wouldn't take much. Not in a controlled environment. Not if the victim didn't see it coming. Mendel wrote it down. Another thread. Another piece of a system that was beginning to feel disturbingly complete. She needed to see Vance. Not as a suspect. Not yet. But as a person. She tracked his last known address. A small apartment in Queens. Leased under his name. Still active. That surprised her. After all these years, he hadn't disappeared. He hadn't run. He had stayed. That was either confidence or something else. She drove there late in the afternoon. The building was unremarkable. Brick exterior. Narrow entrance. Mailboxes lined along the wall. The kind of place that disappears into the block.
She didn't go in.
Not yet. Instead, she watched. People came and went. Residents. Deliveries. No sign of him. She waited. Hours passed. And then, just as the light began to fade, the door opened. A man stepped out. Older now. Gray at the edges. But the face. It matched.
Subtle.
Unremarkable. Exactly the same. Elliot Vance. He moved, without urgency. Locked the door behind him. Adjusted his jacket. Began walking down the street with the same measured pace described years ago by a witness who hadn't realized what they were seeing. Not hurried. Not slow. Controlled. Mendel watched him disappear into the flow of the city.
No hesitation.
No glance back. Just another man moving through New York. Invisible.
She didn't follow.
Not yet. Because following meant escalation. And escalation meant risk. Instead, she sat in the car, the engine off, the silence pressing in. Because now the case had something it had never had before. Not just a pattern. Not just a theory. But a living presence. A man who had existed at the edges of every disappearance. A man who knew the spaces no one else saw. A man who had never been questioned. Never been noticed. Never been suspected. Until now. Mendel looked down at the file in her lap. Daniel Hargrove. 1993. Cold case. Reopened. And for the first time in decades, the silence surrounding it didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. Like someone had been there all along. Waiting. Unseen. Right where no one looks twice. Mendel didn't move for a long time after she saw him. Not because she was unsure. Because she understood exactly what came next. And what it would cost. Cold cases don't break open with dramatic confrontations. They fracture slowly under pressure, under patience. One mistake too early, one move too loud, and everything collapses. Evidence disappears. Patterns vanish. People who lived quietly for decades know how to return to silence. Elliot Vance had survived unnoticed for over 20 years. That didn't happen by accident. So Mendel waited. Not passively. Precisely. The next 48 hours were about observation. No contact. No interviews. No warrants. Just distance. Just watching the shape of a life that had never drawn attention. Vance's routine revealed itself quickly. Morning, he left at 7:10. Not 7 o'clock. Not 7:15. Consistent within a 2-minute window. He walked, never drove. Subway entrances, side streets, service alleys. Paths that avoided crowds without appearing to avoid them. He carried little. No bag most days. Occasionally a small tool case. He still worked. That was the first surprise. Not under any large company. Independent contracts again. Small maintenance jobs. Repairs. Inspections. Buildings that still relied on people like him, people who understood old systems no one else bothered to learn anymore. He still had access. That realization tightened something in Mendel's chest. Because access meant opportunity. And opportunity, if the pattern hadn't stopped, meant risk. She pulled recent missing persons reports. Filtered.
Male.
Age range adjusted upward now, 40 to 60. Last seen at home. No forced entry. Minimal disturbance. The list wasn't long. But it wasn't empty. 3 cases in the last 8 years. All unresolved. All disturbingly familiar. Her eyes locked onto one. 2018. Brooklyn. 49-year-old male. Accountant. Lived alone. Apartment found intact. Wallet inside. Keys missing. No signs of struggle. The same echo. The same silence. She cross-referenced the building. And there it was. A service log. Independent contractor.
E. Vance.
2 weeks before the disappearance. Mendel exhaled slowly. This hadn't ended. It had evolved. Longer gaps. More careful selection. But the pattern, it was still alive. Which meant Vance wasn't a relic of a past crime. He was active. And that changed everything. Because now, waiting wasn't just about solving what happened. It was about stopping what might happen next. She needed surveillance. Official.
Documented.
But she also needed justification strong enough to survive scrutiny. Circumstantial patterns wouldn't be enough. Not yet. So she built it.
Piece by piece.
Timeline overlays. Work logs aligned with disappearance windows. Behavioral consistencies. Witness statements reinterpreted under new context. She didn't push for arrest. She pushed for observation. Limited surveillance approval came through. Bare minimum. Enough to watch. Not enough to act. It would have to be enough. They placed eyes on him. Discreet. Unmarked vehicles. Rotating teams. No direct engagement. Vance moved like someone who had nothing to hide. Or someone who knew exactly how to appear that way. He worked. He ate alone. He returned home. Routine. Predictable. Normal. Days passed. Nothing. No deviations. No suspicious activity. No late-night returns to old buildings. No unexplained movements. If he was active, he wasn't showing it. Mendel began to feel the familiar tension of cold cases pressing back, the sense that the deeper you look, the less there is to see. But then, on the seventh night, something shifted. It was small. Almost nothing. At 11:32 p.m., Vance left his apartment. That alone wasn't unusual. People go out at night. But the timing, the precision, it echoed something older. Something buried in reports from decades ago. Late hours. Measured steps. Controlled movement. The team followed at a distance. Vance walked. No vehicle.
No hesitación.
He moved through streets that thinned as the hour deepened. Businesses closed. Foot traffic faded. The city's noise lowered to a distant hum. He didn't look around. Didn't check behind him. Didn't rush. Just walked. 15 minutes.
20.
Then he turned into a block lined with older buildings. The kind that hadn't been fully modernized. The kind that still had service entrances. Mendel felt it before she saw it. The pattern aligning in real time. Vance approached one building.
Paused.
Not at the main entrance. At the side. A door most people wouldn't notice. He reached into his pocket. Produced a key. Not his residence. Another key. He unlocked it. Slipped inside. The door closed behind him.
Soft.
Deliberate. A quiet click. Mendel's pulse sharpened. This was it. Not proof. Not yet. But movement inside the system. The team held position. Protocol. No entry without cause. No confrontation without evidence. So they waited. Minutes passed. Then 30. Then an hour. No exit. No activity visible from the outside. Just a closed door. And silence. Mendel made the call. Careful. Measured. She requested building access through management. Emergency justification. Delayed response. Time stretched. Every second inside that building mattered. Finally, approval came. Keys delivered. Uniform presence kept minimal. They approached the door. Unlocked it. Opened. Inside. A narrow corridor.
Dim.
Quiet. Familiar. Too familiar. Mendel stepped in first. The air felt the same as before.
Still.
And used. Except it wasn't. Not tonight. She moved forward. Each step controlled. Listening. At the far end, another door. Slightly ajar. That detail hit harder than anything else. Because doors in this system were always closed. Always controlled. Always final. But this one. Open. She pushed it slowly. The hinges barely made a sound. Inside. Another stairwell. Descending.
Dark.
And somewhere below. A faint noise. Not mechanical. Not structural. Human.
A shift.
A breath. Something alive in a place that should have been empty. Mendel felt the weight of it settle instantly. This wasn't history anymore. This wasn't a pattern on paper. This was happening.
Now.
She signaled the team. Weapons drawn. Quiet. Controlled. They began to descend. One step at a time. The darkness thickened as they moved lower, swallowing the last traces of outside light. The air grew colder. Heavier. And then, another sound.
Clear now.
A voice. Not loud. Not screaming.
But strained. Disoriented. Alive.
Mendel's grip tightened. Because in that moment, one truth cut through everything else. Elliot Vance wasn't just connected to the past.
He was still inside it.
Still moving through the same hidden paths. Still using the same silence. And for the first time in decades, the system had been interrupted. Mid-process. Before it could disappear again. Before the door could close. Before the sound became just another memory no one could quite remember. A soft click.
Gone.
The air changed the moment they reached the bottom. It wasn't just colder. It felt occupied. Mendel slowed her pace without realizing it, her steps tightening into something more deliberate, more controlled. Behind her, the team moved in silence, trained, focused, but even they felt it. That subtle shift. The difference between an empty space and a used one. The corridor opened into a low concrete chamber. Exposed pipes, electrical panels, old infrastructure layered over decades of patchwork repairs. The kind of place designed to be ignored, not examined. A place that existed beneath awareness. But it wasn't empty. At the far end, partially obscured by a stack of maintenance crates, there was movement.
A man.
Slumped against the wall, wrists bound, breathing, shallow, uneven.
Alive.
Mendel moved first. Police, she said, low, steady, controlled. Don't move. The man barely reacted. His eyes struggled to focus, pupils wide, unfixed.
Disoriented.
Drugged, most likely. His lips parted, but whatever he tried to say dissolved into a dry, fractured sound. They reached him in seconds. Pulse present. Skin cold. No visible trauma. No blood. No obvious signs of violence. Just restraint. And control. Get EMS moving, someone behind her said into a radio. Mendel scanned the room. Because if the pattern held they weren't alone. There were no chains on the walls. No crude tools. No signs of chaos. Everything was minimal. Intentional. Temporary. This wasn't a holding cell. It was a transition point. A place between. Her eyes moved across the floor, the pipes, the shadows stretching along the concrete. And then she saw it. A second doorway. Half concealed behind structural supports. Open. Dark beyond. Her pulse sharpened. Clear him, she said, nodding toward the rescued man. I'm moving. She didn't wait for confirmation. Didn't need it. Because instinct had already aligned with the pattern. Entry. Containment. Movement. There was always another step. She crossed the room quickly, weapon raised, body angled, every movement controlled. The doorway led into another narrow corridor, tighter than the last, forcing her shoulders slightly inward as she moved.
The smell changed.
Metallic. Not blood. Something else. Industrial. Clean, but not sterile.
Used.
Her mind moved ahead of her, assembling possibilities faster than she could verify them. This wasn't improvisation. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was repetition. Refinement. The corridor bent sharply, cutting off the light behind her. For a moment, everything narrowed into a single line of vision. Darkness ahead, silence pressing in from all sides. Then, footsteps. Not hers. Ahead. Measured.
Retreating.
Mendel froze. Listened. Counted.
1, 2, 3.
Even spacing.
Controlled pace.
The same detail from the witness statements years ago. The same cadence. He was here. Not memory. Not theory. Not pattern. Present. Moving.
She advanced.
Faster now. The corridor widened slightly, opening into another chamber, larger, deeper, layered with shadows. And at the far edge of it, just before another turn swallowed the view completely, a figure.
Tall. Lean.
Moving without urgency. Elliot Vance. He didn't run. That was the first thing that struck her. No panic. No sudden acceleration. Just a slight increase in pace, as if adjusting to a change in timing, not reacting to danger. Stop. Mendel's voice cut through the space. Sharp, direct. He didn't look back. Didn't hesitate. He simply turned the corner and disappeared. Mendel pushed forward, closing the distance, turning the same corner seconds later.
And stopped.
Because the space beyond didn't behave the way it should. 3 paths. Identical in structure. Identical in darkness. No markings. No clear indication of direction. Just branching corridors disappearing into the unseen. A system. Not random. Designed. She listened. Footsteps gone. Silence returned. He knew this place better than anyone else ever could. And he was already ahead. "Fan out," she said into the radio, forcing control back into the moment. 3 paths. He's moving. No exits above ground confirmed yet. Assume internal connections. Her voice remained steady, but underneath it something shifted. Because this wasn't pursuit in open space. This was navigation inside someone else's design. And he had the advantage. Mendel chose the center path. Not by logic, by instinct. She moved quickly, scanning as she advanced. The corridor stretched longer than expected, bending gradually, the structure warping just enough to disorient without fully confusing. It was intentional. Every turn subtle. Every angle just off enough to break spatial memory. Whoever built this system, or learned it, understood how to control movement without barriers. Then, a sound.
Closer now. A door.
Opening. Mendel surged forward, rounding the next bend. Just in time to see it. A metal door at the far end. Closing.
Softly.
Deliberately. A quiet click. The same sound. Again. She reached it seconds later, gripping the handle, pulling.
Locked.
Of course. She stepped back, scanning quickly. No secondary access.
No visible o override.
Just solid metal. Final. Her jaw tightened. "Suspect moving through internal network," she said into the radio. "He's ahead of us. He knows the exits." Behind her, footsteps approached, her team catching up, spreading through the other paths, but the outcome was already clear. He was gone. Again. The system had done exactly what it was built to do.
Absorb.
Redirect. Erase. Mendel stood there for a moment longer than she should have, her hand still resting against the cold metal of the door. Because now she understood something that hadn't been fully visible before. This wasn't just about access. It wasn't just about hidden spaces. It was about control over direction, over movement, over time. Elliot Vance didn't just use these corridors. He navigated them like a map no one else had ever seen. And unless that map was broken, he would always be one step ahead. She turned back, retraced her path, returned to the chamber where the rescued man was being stabilized. Paramedics had arrived.
Lights.
Voices. Controlled urgency filling the space that had been silent for decades. The man was conscious now, barely. Eyes still unfocused. Breathing shallow, but alive. Mendel knelt beside him. "Can you hear me?" she asked, her voice lower now, steadier. A pause. Then a slight movement. A nod. Barely. "What's your name?" His lips moved. Sound struggled out. "Mark." It fractured. But it was enough. "Mark, listen to me. You're safe now. Do you understand?" Another pause. Another weak nod. She studied him carefully, looking for anything that could anchor this moment. "Do you remember how you got here?" His eyes shifted.
Trying.
Failing. Then,
door.
The word barely formed. He said. His voice broke. "Just a minute." Mendel felt it lock into place instantly. The pattern. The method. Invitation.
Trust.
Entry, without force. Control, without struggle. She leaned closer. "Did you know him?" A long silence. Then, a whisper.
No.
Not personal. Not targeted in any obvious way. Selection without connection. That made it worse. Because it meant anyone could be next. Mendel stood slowly, the weight of it settling in completely now. They had interrupted one. Saved one. But the system remained. The paths still existed. The access points still open. And Elliot Vance.
He was still out there.
Moving through spaces no one else could see. Using a network that had taken decades to build, understand, and perfect. She looked around the chamber one last time. At the pipes. The concrete. The hidden doorway now exposed under harsh artificial light. And she realized this place had never been discovered because no one had ever looked at it the right way. Not as a space, but as a route. A living structure. A map. And now that map had a name. Not confirmed. Not proven. But undeniable. Elliot Vance. For the first time in over 20 years, the silence surrounding the case had been broken. Not solved. Not ended. But cracked open. And through that crack, something had escaped. Again. The first thing Mendel noticed after leaving the underground network was how loud the world had become. Sirens. Radios. Footsteps on concrete. Voices overlapping in controlled chaos. The surface felt excessive, almost artificial after what she had just seen below, where sound behaved differently, where silence wasn't absence but design. Mark was already being loaded into an ambulance, oxygen mask secured, vitals stabilizing. He was alive. That should have been the victory condition. That should have been the break in the pattern. But Mendel couldn't feel it, because nothing about what she had just witnessed suggested an ending. Only interruption. She stood beside the perimeter tape, watching the building's side entrance, an unmarked door that now felt less like architecture and more like punctuation in a sentence that had been running for decades. A sentence no one had read correctly. Her radio crackled. Second team reports no exit on West Corridor. Nothing. It dead ends into maintenance wall. South Corridor is clear, another voice added. No suspect. No movement. No movement. That phrase stuck. Because Vance hadn't been trapped. He had been ahead. Again. Mendel exhaled slowly, forcing her thoughts to slow into structure. Emotion had no place here. Not yet. Not until the system was mapped fully. She turned back toward the building. Get me everything, she said into the radio. Every access point. Every exit. Every adjacent structure. I want underground continuity mapped within the hour. A pause. Then confirmation. But even as the teams moved, she already knew something uncomfortable. They weren't mapping a crime scene. They were mapping infrastructure. And infrastructure didn't behave like evidence. It behaved like geography. Back at Precinct, the room filled quickly with monitors, schematics, and overlapping building diagrams. What had once been scattered case files now became a single visual field. Lines connecting basements, service corridors, maintenance shafts, forgotten structural voids. A hidden mesh beneath the city. Mendel stood at the center of it, watching patterns form as data layered itself into coherence. And in that coherence, a shape emerged. Not perfect, not symmetrical, but intentional. A network of partial connections linking disparate buildings across blocks, sometimes streets, sometimes entire neighborhoods apart, but always through maintenance architecture that had been designed decades ago and then ignored. Who builds something like this without documenting it? One analyst muttered. Mendel didn't answer immediately, because she already knew the answer. No one builds it intentionally. It evolves, like a shadow cast by real construction. Additions, repairs, renovations, forgotten corridors that remain because removing them would cost more than ignoring them. And over time, they become something else. A system. She leaned forward. Overlay all known Vance job sites, she said. The analyst complied. Red points appeared across the map. 16 years of scattered maintenance work. Buildings, blocks, facilities. At first glance, random. But then, the overlay tightened. Patterns aligned. Not evenly spaced. Not predictable, but reachable. Each point connected to at least one other via service infrastructure. And most importantly, all routes converged within a radius of 12 city blocks. Mendel narrowed her eyes. Center point, she said quietly. The analyst zoomed in. The map adjusted. And there it was. A cluster of older buildings. Pre-war construction. Multiple renovations. High density of service corridors. A structural labyrinth beneath ordinary streets. Mendel felt it settle in her chest. This wasn't just where Vance operated. This was where everything converged. A hub, a base, or something worse, a control point. She stepped closer to the screen. Pull property records, she said. Ownership, lease history, renovation permits, anything tied to subterranean modifications. Minutes passed. Then data populated. One building stood out immediately. Not because it was suspicious, but because it wasn't. On paper, it was unremarkable. Residential, mixed use. Ground-level businesses. Upper-floor apartments. Standard occupancy. But beneath it, multiple undocumented modifications. Service tunnels extended beyond legal boundaries. Access points reinforced, then concealed. Mendel felt the shift in the room as others noticed it too. This one, she said. No one argued. Because patterns like this didn't lie. They only waited to be seen. She grabbed her coat. We move in, she said. This time, there was no hesitation. No waiting for perfect confirmation. Because perfection didn't exist in systems like this. Only probability. And probability had already tilted too far. The building was older than expected up close. Brick facade, worn edges, windows layered with decades of replacement glass. The street outside felt normal. Pedestrians, traffic, a city continuing unaware of what had been revealed beneath it. That contrast always felt wrong to Mendel. The idea that something this structured could exist underneath something so casual. They entered through the main lobby. Routine identification. Standard procedure. No alarms. No visible concern from residents. But Mendel wasn't looking at faces anymore. She was looking at behavior. Movement patterns. Awareness levels. People who didn't look at officers twice were always the ones she watched closest. They made their way to the service access point. Same pattern as before. Same design logic. Same quiet door blending into architecture. But this time, it was already open. Mendel stopped. So did the team. No words were spoken. Because everyone understood what that meant. Either they were expected. Or they were too late. She raised her hand. Signal. Move. They entered. The corridor beyond was darker than the last. But familiar. Too familiar. The same structural logic. The same branching pathways. The same controlled geometry of movement. But something was different now. There were signs. Recent ones. Footprints. Disturbed dust. A faint scuff along the wall where something had been dragged or leaned. He had been here. Recently. Mendel advanced faster now, tracking subtle evidence as they moved deeper. The network expanded in unpredictable directions, but she had learned how to read it now, not as space, but as intention. Each turn was a decision someone had already made. Each corridor a choice already optimized. Then, a sound. Faint. Ahead. Not footsteps this time. A voice. Barely audible. Please. Mendel froze. The team tightened formation instantly. She raised a hand again. Slow advance. The corridor widened into a larger chamber. And what they saw there changed the air in the room completely. Not empty. Not silent. Occupied. A man stood at the center.
Bound.
Another victim.
Alive.
But barely. Mendel moved first again. Police. Don't move. The man didn't react immediately. Then his head lifted slightly. Eyes unfocused. Lip trembling. Help, he whispered. No resistance.
No trap.
Just presence. And that was what made it worse. Because Vance wasn't here. This wasn't active containment. This was abandonment. Or transition. Or something unfinished. Mendel scanned the room rapidly. No exit in sight. No movement. But one detail stood out.
A door.
Partially open. Not hidden. Not concealed. Just left. Like a mistake. Or an invitation. She approached slowly. Every instinct alert. The door led into another corridor. And on the floor, a set of footprints.
Fresh.
Moving away. Not running. Walking. Controlled. Measured. The same cadence. Always the same cadence. Mendel stepped back slightly. Track direction, she ordered. But she already knew. He was ahead again. Always ahead. The system wasn't just infrastructure anymore.
It was escape.
And somewhere inside it, Elliot Vance was still moving. Not lost. Not trapped. But continuing. As if the interruption had never happened at all. And for the first time, Mendel realized something that made the entire case shift in weight. They weren't chasing a man. They were chasing continuity. And continuity, once established, doesn't stop just because it's been seen. It adapts. It reroutes. It disappears again into the spaces. No one looks twice. And waits. The man they found didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Not because he couldn't, but because his mind hadn't decided whether sound was still safe. He sat against the concrete wall, wrists no longer bound, but his posture remained locked in that same compressed position, as if his body had forgotten how to expand. His eyes tracked movement in fragments, never settling, always anticipating something just outside the frame. Mendel stayed in front of him, not close enough to overwhelm, not far enough to lose control of the moment. "Listen to me," she said, voice steady. "You're safe. You're out. You're with police." A pause. The man swallowed. His throat worked before his voice returned, cracked and thin. "You're sure?" The question wasn't about authority. It was about reality. Mendel nodded once. Yes. That answer should have been enough. It wasn't. His gaze drifted behind her, toward the corridor they had come through. "Is he still there?" he asked. No name. No description. Just the pronoun. Mendel didn't respond immediately, because the answer mattered more than the question. The team had already swept the immediate chamber. No sign of movement. No secondary exit visible from this position. But the network beneath them wasn't static. It never had been. "We're clearing the area," she said instead. "Tell me your name." A hesitation. Then, "David." Another pause, as if remembering it took effort. "David, how long were you down here?" His eyes lowered slightly. Time wasn't stable in answers like this. It never was in cases like this. "I don't know," he whispered. "Maybe hours. Maybe days." It felt like both. Mendel exchanged a glance with one of the officers behind her. Disorientation. Possible sedatives. Psychological manipulation. Standard possibilities. But none of them explained the architecture they were standing inside. "Did you see him?" she asked carefully. David's body tightened instantly. That reaction mattered more than words.
"Yes," he said. Short.
Immediate. Then silence. Mendel kept her voice low. "Where?" His breathing changed. Faster. Shallower. "In the corridors," he said finally. "He doesn't stay in one place." The sentence hung there. Doesn't stay. Not present. Not fixed. Mendel leaned in slightly. "Describe him." David's eyes flickered again, searching memory, or avoiding it. "Normal," he said. "That's the worst part." Mendel didn't interrupt. "He looks normal," David continued. "Like someone you'd pass in a hallway and forget. He talks like he already knows what you're going to say." A pause. "He never runs." That detail landed heavily.
Because running implies panic.
And panic implies loss of control. Vance didn't lose control. David's voice dropped further. "I thought I was being moved between buildings," he said. "Like maintenance corridors or storage access. But it's not just paths. It's like he knows which doors will open before he reaches them." Mendel felt the system in his words more clearly than in any map. Predictive movement. Environmental familiarity. Prepositioned access. "This isn't random," she said quietly. David shook his head immediately.
"No," he said.
"It's not random. It's rehearsed." That word changed the room. Rehearsed. Not improvised. Not opportunistic. Rehearsed implies repetition. Practice. Refinement. A system built through iteration rather than design. Mendel straightened slightly. "How many others?" she asked. David hesitated. Longer this time. His voice lowered almost to nothing.
"I heard them," he said.
That was worse than a number. Mendel waited. "In other rooms," he continued. "Sometimes I think they were close. Sometimes I think they weren't there anymore. I don't know which." A pause. "And sometimes I think he was testing something." That word again.
Testing.
Mendel felt something tighten in her chest. Not fear, not shock, but recognition. She had seen patterns like this before in other domains. Behavioral conditioning, controlled environments, systems that evolve through feedback loops. But this wasn't a lab. This was a city. Testing what? She asked. David shook his head. I don't know, he said. People, maybe. Or reactions. Or timing. Timing. That aligned too well with everything else. The controlled pacing. The predictable intervals between disappearances. The precision of movement through infrastructure. Mendel stood slowly. Stay with him, she said to the medic. We're continuing pursuit. The team shifted immediately. But David grabbed her sleeve before she could move. His grip wasn't strong, but it was desperate. Don't follow him too deep, he said. Mendel looked down at him. Why? His eyes finally focused directly on hers. Because he doesn't just use the system, he said. He lives in it. Then he released her. The words lingered longer than they should have. Lives in it. Not passes through. Not uses.
Lives.
Mendel turned toward the corridor again. The footprints were still there. Still fresh. Still moving forward. The pursuit resumed. But something had changed in the way the team moved now. Less like law enforcement. More like navigation through unfamiliar terrain. The corridors tightened again as they progressed. Pipes overhead, damp concrete walls, electrical junctions exposed like veins in a body too large to map completely. Every few meters, intersections branched outward. And every branch felt like a decision already made by someone else. They followed the tracks. Always the tracks. Until they didn't need them anymore. Because the pattern itself became readable. Vance wasn't escaping randomly. He was moving along a route that avoided convergence points. Places where corridors intersected too densely. Places where pursuit would naturally accelerate.
He avoided them.
Intentionally. Mendel slowed slightly. He's guiding movement, she said. One of the officers frowned.
Guiding.
Not just evading, she said. He's controlling where we can go. That realization shifted the tension again. Because it implied awareness of pursuit structure. Knowledge of how teams would advance. Anticipation of tactical movement. Ahead of them, the corridor widened slightly. And for the first time, something new appeared. Markings. Not graffiti. Not damage. Indicators. Small, subtle markers on the wall, chalk-like lines, faint arrows, symbols too simple to be accidental. Directional cues. Mendel crouched briefly, examining one. It pointed left. The team paused. She looked down the left corridor. Then the right. Both structurally identical. But only one marked. Trap? One officer asked. Mendel didn't answer immediately. Because traps rely on reaction. And this didn't feel like reaction. It felt like instruction. Forward, she said finally. They moved. Left corridor. The air changed slightly as they progressed. Less damp. More circulated. Suggesting proximity to another ventilation system or a different section of the structure. Then, another chamber. This one larger.
Cleaner.
More intentionally maintained. And empty. No victim. No suspect. Just space. But on the far wall.
A door. Closed.
Mendel approached slowly. No markings. No handle on their side. Just a smooth metal surface embedded into concrete. A transition point. She pressed her ear against it. Silence. Then, very faint. Footsteps. On the other side. Still moving. Still measured. Still controlled. He's here, she said quietly. The team tightened formation. They prepared. But Mendel hesitated. Because something about this door felt different. Not like the others. Not like concealment. Like conclusion. She raised a hand.
Wait.
Silence. Then, a sound. From behind them.
Soft.
Familiar. A quiet click. Mendel turned instantly. The corridor behind them. Empty. But the path they had come through was changing. Another door had closed somewhere upstream. Not visible. Not audible until now. But unmistakably final. The system had begun to segment.
Contain.
Redirect. Mendel understood it instantly. He wasn't just ahead. He was restructuring the pursuit behind them, cutting routes, isolating movement, splitting teams,
Controlling flow.
The realization hit like pressure. "We're being separated," she said sharply. Back teams confirmed status. Static. Then fragmented responses. Confusion. Distance increasing. Signal degradation. The system wasn't just physical. It was functional. And they were inside it. Ahead. The footsteps stopped. Silence returned. Then, the door in front of them slowly began to open. Not forced. Not broken. Unlocked. As if invited, Mendel raised her weapon, but didn't move. Because for the first time since this began, Elliot Vance was no longer ahead. He was at the threshold, waiting on the other side of the final door. And, this time, there was nowhere further to go. The verdict does not close the case. It only changes its shape. Because what follows after guilty is not resolution, but aftermath. The slow, uneven processing of a truth that has already done its damage long before any courtroom could contain it. The courthouse empties in waves. Reporters first, rushing to file, to frame, to reduce years of complexity into headlines that can be consumed in seconds. Then spectators, moving more slowly, as if reluctant to leave a space where something final has just occurred. Then the professionals, lawyers, officers, clerks, each carrying the weight of repetition, of cases that end but never fully leave. And finally, what remains is silence. Not the silence of absence. The silence of completion. The suspect is already gone from public view. Transported under protocol. No spectacle. No final interaction with the world that has spent years circling his name. Only the administrative transition from courtroom to correctional system, from legal conclusion to physical containment. But the case itself refuses to stay contained. Inside the investigative unit, the files remain open long after the verdict is delivered. Not out of doubt, but out of necessity. Evidence must be finalized. Reports must be compiled. Every detail must be locked into a structure that future scrutiny cannot unravel. And still, no one feels finished. Because finishing implies emotional closure. And this case never offered that. The detective assigned to Daniel Mercer's file returns to the garage alone 2 days after the sentencing hearing. The site is quiet now. Stripped of activity. No yellow tape. No cameras. Just a repaired structure waiting to be repurposed, as if nothing beneath it ever existed. But memory does not follow repair. He stands where the excavation once revealed the truth. And for a long moment he says nothing, because there is nothing left to ask, only something left to carry. The ground has been sealed again, concrete restored, surface smoothed over. But restoration, he knows, is not erasure. It is simply containment. The case file in his hands is thick now, heavier than it was at the beginning. Not because of unanswered questions, but because of answered ones that feel heavier than uncertainty ever did. Inside that file is Daniel Mercer's reconstructed life. Not just his disappearance, but the path that led to it, and the years that followed in absence of truth.
Names. Times.
Coordinates. Statements. Forensic reconstructions. Photographic documentation of soil layers and structural disturbance. And at the center of it all, a timeline that no longer bends. It is fixed now. Irreversible. The detective flips through pages slowly. Not searching for new information. Just revisiting what has already been confirmed. Because confirmation does not always bring relief. Sometimes it brings weight. Outside, the community begins its own form of adjustment. At first, it is visible. Memorials appear near the old gas station on Highway 6. Flowers. Candles. Photographs printed and reprinted over the years. Daniel's face, once a plea for help, now becomes something else. A marker of what was lost. People who never knew him visit anyway. Not out of obligation. Out of recognition that absence can belong to everyone once it becomes known. But grief in a solved case behaves differently. It does not rush. It settles.
Slowly.
Unevenly. Some residents speak openly about shock, about disbelief that something so severe could exist in such proximity to their ordinary routines. Others avoid the topic entirely, as if silence might preserve the illusion of distance. But no one is untouched, because closure does not erase proximity. It only reveals it. In interviews conducted after the trial, the truck driver who first mentioned the dark sedan struggles to reconcile memory with confirmation. "I saw something," he says, "but I didn't know I saw that." That sentence repeats across the community in different forms. I didn't know. I didn't realize. I didn't think it mattered. But meaning is rarely visible at the moment it forms. It becomes visible later. Too late to intervene. At the department, internal reviews begin quietly. Not disciplinary. Reflective. Case handling is analyzed. Gaps identified. Procedures evaluated. Because every cold case solved carries with it an implicit question. What allowed it to remain unsolved for so long? The answers are never simple. Limited technology in 2005. Fragmented surveillance systems. Overlapping jurisdictions. Witness hesitation. Information decay. But beneath all of it lies something harder to quantify. Attention, or the lack of it. The detective understands this more than anyone, not as failure, but as structure. Cases do not disappear because they are forgotten. They disappear because they are not yet visible in the way that demands action. And visibility is unpredictable. He returns home late one night after reviewing the final compiled report. Does not turn on the television. Does not open additional files. Just sits in silence that feels different now than it did before. Because silence, after a solved cold case, is no longer empty. It is populated with reconstructed events, with timelines that no longer change, with outcomes that cannot be undone. Daniel Mercer does not leave his thoughts easily, not as a victim, but as a sequence of moments that should have diverged and did not. A man leaving work, a gas station stop, a reflection in glass, a car parked at an angle no one initially noticed, a conversation that shifted tone without warning, a decision that collapsed into consequence. And beyond that, years of absence, years of not knowing, years of searching through space that had already been closed. The detective opens the final page of the report. It contains only procedural closure language. Case resolved. Charges adjudicated. Subject convicted. File archived. But he does not close it immediately, because closure in paperwork is not the same as closure in perception. And perception lingers longer. Outside, life continues. Unaware of the weight still being processed inside rooms that no longer require activity. But inside those rooms, something fundamental has changed. Not justice. Not history, but understanding. Because what remains after everything is stripped away is not mystery anymore. It is the recognition that ordinary systems, ordinary moments, and ordinary decisions can align into something irreversible. And that realization does not end with a verdict. It begins there. The tape changed everything. For 30 years, the Navarro investigation had existed inside rumor, fragmented paperwork, and the fading memories of exhausted detectives. But hearing the voice transformed the case into something alive again, something breathing. The sentence spread across every network in America within hours. She shouldn't have trusted me. 5 words.
Calm. Cold.
Delivered without panic. Without remorse. Suddenly, the mystery no longer felt distant. It felt intimate, personal. The public stopped seeing Daniel Mercer as an old retired transit worker and began seeing him as something else entirely, a man who had carried a secret through decades of ordinary life while the city unknowingly moved around him every day. Outside the courthouse in Manhattan, reporters waited from sunrise until midnight. Satellite vans clogged entire intersections. Former investigators appeared on television arguing over evidence that should have remained buried in archive boxes. Some believed the tape alone proved Mercer's involvement. Others warned that after 30 years, memories became unreliable, evidence deteriorated, narratives distorted themselves. But then a forensic linguistics expert hired by the prosecution delivered a statement that sent another wave of shock through the case. According to his analysis, the speaker on the tape was not improvising. He sounded rehearsed, controlled, prepared for the call before it happened. That detail disturbed Detective Leah Morales more than anything else. Because rehearsed meant planned. And planned meant Elena Navarro may have been targeted long before she vanished into the rain. Morales returned to the original timeline obsessively. She rebuilt Elena's final week minute by minute, reconstructing movements through archived receipts, payroll records, witness interviews, and subway logs. Most of it led nowhere. Grocery stores,
Commutes.
office meetings, routine. But buried inside an old Midtown building security report, Morales found something investigators in 1993 barely acknowledged. 3 days before Elena disappeared, a maintenance employee reported seeing the same unidentified man standing across from the building entrance for nearly 2 hours. The witness described him as middle-aged, wearing dark gloves despite unusually warm weather. When approached, the man simply walked away without speaking. The report had never been followed up. Morales stared at the page for almost an hour. Because Daniel Mercer wore gloves habitually even in old surveillance footage from recent years. Suddenly, the prosecution's theory shifted. This was no spontaneous encounter. No random street crime swallowed by the chaos of 1990s New York. Investigators now believed Mercer watched Elena repeatedly before approaching her that night. The photograph found inside his home suggested stalking. The tape suggested familiarity. And the folded coat at Riverside Drive now felt less like an accident and more like ritual. But the deeper Morales dug, the stranger the case became. Financial investigators discovered Mercer withdrew nearly $6,000 in cash 1 week after Elena vanished. No explanation existed for where the money went. His bank history before and after remained perfectly ordinary. Detectives theorized blackmail, payment, bribery. Maybe Mercer paid someone to remain silent. Maybe someone helped him dispose of evidence. Nobody could prove any of it. Yet the suspicion infected every corner of the investigation. Then another witness emerged. Not from New York. From Florida. A retired truck driver named Carl Donahue contacted authorities after seeing Mercer's face on television. According to Donahue, he encountered Mercer at a roadside diner in Pennsylvania during the winter of 1994, months after Elena disappeared. The man spent hours drinking coffee and talking nervously about police investigations in New York. Donahue remembered him specifically because of one sentence. "They'll never find where she ended up." When investigators interviewed Donahue formally, he became visibly shaken, recounting the memory. He insisted Mercer looked terrified while saying it, glancing repeatedly toward the diner windows as if expecting someone to arrive. Detectives verified enough details from the encounter to consider the statement credible. Suddenly, prosecutors possessed something they lacked before, behavioral evidence pointing toward knowledge only a perpetrator could possess. Still, Mercer refused to confess. Inside Rikers Island, where he remained awaiting further hearings, guards described him as eerily composed. He read newspapers constantly, slept normally, requested black coffee every morning at exactly 6:15. But several corrections officers later reported hearing him speaking quietly to himself late at night. Not angry, not unstable, almost conversational. One guard claimed Mercer repeated the phrase, "You left me no choice," over and over through the bars of his cell. The media frenzy intensified. True crime podcasts dissected every surviving detail. Amateur investigators flooded internet forums with conspiracy theories. Some claimed Mercer was connected to organized crime figures operating in Manhattan during the early 1990s. Others believed he had committed additional murders hidden beneath unsolved missing persons files. Detectives quietly reopened 4 disappearances sharing similar geographic patterns with Elena's case, but no definitive links surfaced publicly. Then Morales received a call that nearly shattered the investigation completely. An elderly woman from Brooklyn claimed she dated Mercer briefly during the late 1980s. Her name was Evelyn Pike, 81 years old, frail voice, sharp memory. Detectives met her inside a nursing facility where she described Mercer as obsessive, intensely private, and deeply disturbed by abandonment. According to Pike, Mercer once exploded with rage after she canceled dinner plans unexpectedly. He accused her of disappearing on him intentionally. She ended the relationship soon afterward. But before detectives left, Pike revealed something even darker. Mercer allegedly kept boxes of women's photographs hidden inside his apartment decades earlier. Not pornography. Street photographs. Women walking. Waiting at bus stops. Leaving office buildings. Unaware they were being watched. The room fell silent as she described it, because investigators had already recovered one photograph of Elena. Now, they suspected there had been many more. Search warrants expanded immediately. Detectives tore through old storage facilities connected to Mercer's past residences, hoping to uncover additional evidence. Most units contained nothing but furniture and water-damaged junk. Then investigators opened a rusted locker in Brooklyn registered under Mercer's name since 1991. Inside were hundreds of undeveloped film negatives. Forensic technicians worked around the clock restoring the images. What emerged horrified even veteran detectives. Dozens of women photographed across New York City throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s. Some entering subway stations. Some carrying groceries. Some laughing with friends. Most appeared completely unaware they were being followed. The photographs varied in distance and quality, but one detail remained constant. Mercer focused obsessively on routine.
Commutes.
Habits. Timing.
He studied people.
Cataloged them. And among the photographs, investigators discovered 6 separate images of Elena Navarro taken weeks before her disappearance. The discovery detonated across national headlines. Secret photo archive found in cold case investigation. Did suspect hunt victims across NYC? Thousands demand full review of unsolved cases. Public fear evolved into outrage. Families connected to old disappearances demanded answers from the NYPD. Critics accused earlier investigators of incompetence. Retired officers defended themselves aggressively, insisting forensic limitations in 1993 made modern conclusions impossible back then. Morales ignored the noise. She cared about one thing only: finding Elena. Because despite everything, the tape, the photographs, the DNA, her body had never been recovered. And without that final piece, the entire prosecution remained vulnerable. Then winter arrived. The first snowstorm of January buried New York beneath silence. Traffic slowed. Streets emptied early. And during that storm, Mercer finally requested another interview. No lawyer present. Detectives could barely believe it. Morales entered the interrogation room just after midnight. Mercer looked thinner than before, older somehow. The confidence he carried during earlier questioning seemed cracked now, fraying around the edges. Snow reflected against the narrow glass window behind him while the tape recorder rolled. For several minutes, he said nothing. Then he asked a strange question. "Do you know what the city sounded like back then?" Morales didn't answer. Mercer leaned back slowly. "You could disappear inside New York in the 90s. People today don't understand that. Too many cameras now. Too many phones. Back then the city swallowed people every day." His voice remained calm, measured, almost nostalgic. Then he looked directly at Morales for the first time. She wasn't supposed to matter. The sentence landed like a hammer. Detectives listening behind the observation glass froze completely. Mercer continued speaking quietly, describing loneliness after his wife left him years earlier. He described walking Manhattan for hours after work, watching crowds move around him anonymously. Thousands of strangers. Thousands of lives intersecting briefly, then vanishing forever. According to Mercer, Elena smiled at him one evening outside her office building after he helped hold a door open during heavy rain. "That's all it was," he whispered. "One smile." Morales felt the room tightening around her. Mercer admitted following Elena afterward, watching her routines, learning her commute, memorizing where she bought coffee in the mornings, which subway and trance she preferred, which nights she worked late. The obsession consumed him slowly until fantasy blurred with reality. Then came October 14th.
She looked tired, Mercer said.
Like she didn't want to go home yet. His breathing changed slightly. For the first time, emotion flickered across his face. He described approaching Elena near Midtown calmly, casually, pretending to recognize her from previous encounters around the building. She hesitated initially. Then the rain intensified. Streets crowded. Taxis impossible to find. Mercer offered to help her reach Riverside where traffic might be easier. And she trusted him. Just enough. According to Mercer, they walked together for nearly 20 minutes speaking about meaningless things: weather, work, subway delays. He claimed he never planned what happened next. But Morales no longer believed anything about him was accidental. When she finally asked the question everyone feared most, Mercer stared downward silently for almost 30 seconds. What happened at Riverside Drive? Outside the interrogation room, even veteran detectives stopped breathing. Mercer rubbed his hands together slowly. Then he answered. She realized I knew too much about her. Silence. Snow hammered softly against the glass. She became afraid. Another pause. And once someone looks at you like that, he whispered, there's no going backward. But before detectives could press further, Mercer suddenly stopped talking.
Completely.
He asked for water. Then for his attorney. The interview ended abruptly before he revealed where Elena's body had gone. And 3 days later, before prosecutors could secure a formal confession, Daniel Mercer was found unconscious inside his jail cell after suffering a massive stroke.
He survived.
But doctors warned he might never speak again. The tape changed everything. For 30 years, the Navarro investigation had existed inside rumor, fragmented paperwork, and the fading memories of exhausted detectives. But hearing the voice transformed the case into something alive again, something breathing. The sentence spread across every network in America within hours. She shouldn't have trusted me. 5 words.
Calm. Cold.
Delivered without panic. Without remorse. Suddenly, the mystery no longer felt distant. It felt intimate. Personal. The public stopped seeing Daniel Mercer as an old retired transit worker and began seeing him as something else entirely, a man who had carried a secret through decades of ordinary life while the city unknowingly moved around him every day. Outside the courthouse in Manhattan, reporters waited from sunrise until midnight. Satellite vans clogged entire intersections. Former investigators appeared on television arguing over evidence that should have remained buried in archive boxes. Some believed the tape alone proved Mercer's involvement. Others warned that after 30 years, memories became unreliable, evidence deteriorated, narratives distorted themselves. But then a forensic linguistics expert hired by the prosecution delivered a statement that sent another wave of shock through the case. According to his analysis, the speaker on the tape was not improvising. He sounded rehearsed, controlled, prepared for the call before it happened. That detail disturbed Detective Lena Morales more than anything else. Because rehearsed meant planned. And planned meant Elena Navarro may have been targeted long before she vanished into the rain. Morales returned to the original timeline obsessively. She rebuilt Elena's final week minute by minute, reconstructing movements through archived receipts, payroll records, witness interviews, and subway logs. Most of it led nowhere. Grocery stores.
Commutes.
Office meetings. Routine. But buried inside an old Midtown building security report, Morales found something investigators in 1993 barely acknowledged. 3 days before Elena disappeared, a maintenance employee reported seeing the same unidentified man standing across from the building entrance for nearly 2 hours. The witness described him as middle-aged, wearing dark gloves despite unusually warm weather. When approached, the man simply walked away without speaking. The report had never been followed up. Morales stared at the page for almost an hour. Because Daniel Mercer wore gloves habitually even in old surveillance footage from recent years. Suddenly, the prosecution's theory shifted. This was no spontaneous encounter. No random street crime swallowed by the chaos of 1990s New York. Investigators now believed Mercer watched Elena repeatedly before approaching her that night. The photograph found inside his home, suggested stalking. The tape suggested familiarity. And the folded coat at Riverside Drive now felt less like an accident and more like ritual. But the deeper Morales dug, the stranger the case became. Financial investigators discovered Mercer withdrew nearly $6,000 in cash 1 week after Elena vanished. No explanation existed for where the money went. His bank history before and after remained perfectly ordinary. Detectives theorized blackmail, payment, bribery. Maybe Mercer paid someone to remain silent. Maybe someone helped him dispose of evidence. Nobody could prove any of it. Yet the suspicion infected every corner of the investigation. Then another witness emerged. Not from New York. From Florida. A retired truck driver named Carl Donahue contacted authorities after seeing Mercer's face on television. According to Donahue, he encountered Mercer at a roadside diner in Pennsylvania during the winter of 1994, months after Elena disappeared. The man spent hours drinking coffee and talking nervously about police investigations in New York. Donahue remembered him specifically because of one sentence. "They'll never find where she ended up." When investigators interviewed Donahue formally, he became visibly shaken, recounting the memory. He insisted Mercer looked terrified while saying it, glancing repeatedly toward the diner windows as if expecting someone to arrive. Detectives verified enough details from the encounter to consider the statement credible. Suddenly, prosecutors possessed something they lacked before, behavioral evidence pointing toward knowledge only a perpetrator could possess. Still, Mercer refused to confess. Inside Rikers Island, where he remained awaiting further hearings, guards described him as eerily composed. He read newspapers constantly, slept normally, requested black coffee every morning at exactly 6:15. But several corrections officers later reported hearing him speaking quietly to himself late at night. Not angry, not unstable, almost conversational. One guard claimed Mercer repeated the phrase, "You left me no choice," over and over through the bars of his cell. The media frenzy intensified. True crime podcasts dissected every surviving detail. Amateur investigators flooded internet forums with conspiracy theories. Some claimed Mercer was connected to organized crime figures operating in Manhattan during the early 1990s. Others believed he had committed additional murders hidden beneath unsolved missing persons files. Detectives quietly reopened 4 disappearances, sharing similar geographic patterns with Elena's case, but no definitive links surfaced publicly. Then Morales received a call that nearly shattered the investigation completely. An elderly woman from Brooklyn claimed she dated Mercer briefly during the late 1980s. Her name was Evelyn Pike, 81 years old. Frail voice. Sharp memory. Detectives met her inside a nursing facility where she described Mercer as obsessive, intensely private, and deeply disturbed by abandonment. According to Pike, Mercer once exploded with rage after she canceled dinner plans unexpectedly. He accused her of disappearing on him intentionally. She ended the relationship soon afterward. But before detectives left, Pike revealed something even darker. Mercer allegedly kept boxes of women's photographs hidden inside his apartment decades earlier. Not pornography. Street photographs. Women walking. Waiting at bus stops. Leaving office buildings. Unaware they were being watched. The room fell silent as she described it, because investigators had already recovered one photograph of Elena. Now, they suspected there had been many more. Search warrants expanded immediately. Detectives tore through old storage facilities connected to Mercer's past residences, hoping to uncover additional evidence. Most units contained nothing but furniture and water-damaged junk. Then investigators opened a rusted locker in Brooklyn registered under Mercer's name since 1991. Inside were hundreds of undeveloped film negatives. Forensic technicians worked around the clock restoring the images. What emerged horrified even veteran detectives. Dozens of women photographed across New York City throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s. Some entering subway stations. Some carrying groceries. Some laughing with friends. Most appeared completely unaware they were being followed. The photographs varied in distance and quality, but one detail remained constant. Mercer focused obsessively on routine.
Commutes.
Habits. Timing.
He studied people.
Cataloged them. And among the photographs, investigators discovered 6 separate images of Elena Navarro taken weeks before her disappearance. The discovery detonated across national headlines. Secret photo archive found in cold case investigation. Did suspect hunt victims across NYC? Thousands demand full review of unsolved cases. Public fear evolved into outrage. Families connected to old disappearances demanded answers from the NYPD. Critics accused earlier investigators of incompetence. Retired officers defended themselves aggressively, insisting forensic limitations in 1993 made modern conclusions impossible back then. Morales ignored the noise. She cared about one thing only: finding Elena. Because despite everything, the tape, the photographs, the DNA, her body had never been recovered. And without that final piece, the entire prosecution remained vulnerable. Then winter arrived. The first snowstorm of January buried New York beneath silence. Traffic slowed. Streets emptied early. And during that storm, Mercer finally requested another interview. No lawyer present. Detectives could barely believe it. Morales entered the interrogation room just after midnight. Mercer looked thinner than before, older somehow. The confidence he carried during earlier questioning seemed cracked now, fraying around the edges. Snow reflected against the narrow glass window behind him while the tape recorder rolled. For several minutes, he said nothing. Then he asked a strange question. "Do you know what the city sounded like back then?" Morales didn't answer. Mercer leaned back slowly. "You could disappear inside New York in the 90s. People today don't understand that. Too many cameras now. Too many phones. Back then the city swallowed people every day." His voice remained calm, measured, almost nostalgic. Then he looked directly at Morales for the first time. She wasn't supposed to matter. The sentence landed like a hammer. Detectives listening behind the observation glass froze completely. Mercer continued speaking quietly, describing loneliness after his wife left him years earlier. He described walking Manhattan for hours after work, watching crowds move around him anonymously. Thousands of strangers. Thousands of lives intersecting briefly, then vanishing forever. According to Mercer, Elena smiled at him one evening outside her office building after he helped hold a door open during heavy rain. "That's all it was," he whispered. "One smile." Morales felt the room tightening around her. Mercer admitted following Elena afterward, watching her routines, learning her commute, memorizing where she bought coffee in the mornings, which subway and trance she preferred, which nights she worked late. The obsession consumed him slowly until fantasy blurred with reality. Then came October 14th. "She looked tired," Mercer said, like she didn't want to go home yet. His breathing changed slightly. For the first time, emotion flickered across his face. He described approaching Elena near Midtown calmly, casually, pretending to recognize her from previous encounters around the building. She hesitated initially. Then the rain intensified. Streets crowded. Taxis impossible to find. Mercer offered to help her reach Riverside where traffic might be easier. And she trusted him. Just enough. According to Mercer, they walked together for nearly 20 minutes, speaking about meaningless things: weather, work, subway delays. He claimed he never planned what happened next. But Morales no longer believed anything about him was accidental. When she finally asked the question everyone feared most, Mercer stared downward silently for almost 30 seconds. What happened at Riverside Drive? Outside the interrogation room, even veteran detectives stopped breathing. Mercer rubbed his hands together slowly. Then he answered. "She realized I knew too much about her." Silence. Snow hammered softly against the glass. She became afraid. Another pause. "And once someone looks at you like that," he whispered, "there's no going backward." But before detectives could press further, Mercer suddenly stopped talking.
Completely.
He asked for water. Then for his attorney. The interview ended abruptly before he revealed where Elena's body had gone. And 3 days later, before prosecutors could secure a formal confession, Daniel Mercer was found unconscious inside his jail cell after suffering a massive stroke.
He survived.
but doctors warned he might never speak again. The stroke should have ended the case. That was the first thing reporters whispered outside Bellevue Hospital when news broke before dawn. After 30 years of silence, after decades of theories and dead ends and grief hardened into routine, the only living man connected to Elena Navarro's disappearance had collapsed before revealing the one answer everyone still needed. Detectives stood inside freezing January air, watching satellite trucks line the streets below hospital windows glowing pale against the snow. Nobody said it aloud, but they all feared the same thing. Mercer might die without speaking again. And if he did, the truth would disappear with him forever. Inside intensive care, machines breathed rhythmically beside his bed, while armed officers guarded the hallway around the clock. Doctors described severe neurological damage affecting speech and memory retention. Prosecutors panicked immediately. Without a full confession or physical recovery evidence, defense attorneys would attack every remaining piece of the case relentlessly. DNA placed Mercer near Riverside Drive. The photographs proved obsession. The tapes suggested involvement. But legally, investigators still lacked certainty about Elena's final moments. And certainty was everything. Detective Lena Morales refused to accept the case, ending inside a hospital room. While Mercer drifted in and out of consciousness, she reopened every inch of Manhattan connected to the original timeline. She walked Elena's final route personally through sleet and winter rain, retracing blocks the victim crossed 33 years earlier. Midtown had changed beyond recognition since 1993. Old diners replaced by luxury towers. Payphones erased. Subway entrances renovated. But Riverside Drive remained hauntingly familiar after dark. The same river wind. The same concrete barriers. The same black water rolling silently beside the city lights. Morales kept replaying Mercer's unfinished sentence in her head. She realized I knew too much about her. That moment mattered. Because fear changes movement, changes decisions. If Elena became frightened near Riverside Drive, she may have attempted escape. Witnesses from 1993 described no screams, no visible struggle, no immediate disturbance reported by nearby residents. Investigators originally interpreted that as evidence the encounter remained calm until the very end. Now Morales wondered if something else happened. Something faster. She requested original weather data from October 14, 1993. Heavy rain, strong wind, reduced visibility, street noise amplified by passing traffic and river conditions. Under those circumstances, a brief confrontation could vanish into the background of Manhattan nightlife without drawing attention, especially during an era when violence already saturated the city daily. Then another forgotten detail resurfaced. One of the original patrol officers from the scene, now retired in upstate New York, contacted Morales after watching news coverage surrounding Mercer's hospitalization. His name was Thomas Avery, 70 years old, former NYPD transit officer. During their phone conversation, Avery admitted something that had bothered him since 1993. The coat was dry underneath. Morales froze. According to Avery, the outside fabric was soaked by rain exposure, but when he lifted the folded coat near Riverside Drive, the interior lining remained partially dry. At the time, he dismissed it as meaningless. But decades later, the memory still disturbed him, because it suggested the coat had not been sitting outside very long before police arrived, which meant the anonymous caller may have remained near the scene watching officers discover it. The implication hit Morales immediately. Mercer didn't merely lure police there. He stayed. Maybe to observe. Maybe to relive what happened. Maybe because he couldn't leave. Search teams returned to Riverside Park within 48 hours, using modern ground-penetrating radar across sections overlooked during the original investigation. Crews worked through freezing temperatures while media helicopters circled overhead broadcasting live updates nationwide. Nothing surfaced initially except debris buried beneath decades of urban sediment. Old bottles, rusted metal, construction remnants. Then radar technicians identified an anomaly beneath a sealed maintenance section near an abandoned river access tunnel closed since the mid-1990s. Excavation began immediately. By sunset the next day, investigators uncovered deteriorated fabric fragments buried beneath concrete fill and compacted earth. Forensic teams sealed the area instantly. Reporters watching from barricades erupted into chaos as rumors spread through police scanners. Nobody confirmed anything publicly, but by midnight investigators recovered additional items from the tunnel cavity. A damaged leather handbag. A woman's wristwatch stopped permanently at 12:14 a.m. And human remains. The city exploded. News alerts interrupted national broadcasts. Crowds gathered outside police headquarters chanting Elena Navarro's name while journalists scrambled for confirmation. Detectives remained silent pending forensic verification, but privately many already believed the search had finally ended after 3 decades. Morales didn't celebrate, because the tunnel raised horrifying new questions. The location sat less than 200 yards from where the coat was discovered in 1993. Yet despite multiple searches during the original investigation, nobody found the concealed access point because heavy flooding years earlier caused city workers to permanently seal part of the structure. Mercer apparently knew about the tunnel through his transit maintenance experience, which meant he understood the city beneath the city. The forgotten spaces. The hidden corridors. The places normal people never saw. Forensic anthropologists worked continuously for 6 days analyzing the remains. Damage from moisture and time complicated identification, but dental comparisons eventually confirmed what the Navarro family had feared for 33 years. Elena had finally been found. The announcement devastated New York. Outside St. Patrick's Cathedral, mourners left flowers beneath photographs of Elena smiling in images frozen forever from the early 1990s. True crime audiences who once treated the case like entertainment suddenly confronted its human weight. A missing woman had become a body hidden underground while millions of people unknowingly passed above her for decades. And Daniel Mercer still hadn't spoken another word. Doctors reported limited recovery following the stroke. He could open his eyes occasionally, respond to simple instructions inconsistently, but meaningful speech remained absent. Prosecutors rushed to preserve every previous interrogation recording before defense attorneys attempted suppression arguments based on Mercer's medical decline. Then the autopsy report arrived, and the room went silent. According to forensic analysis, Elena likely survived for a period of time after the initial confrontation at Riverside Drive. Evidence suggested restraint, containment, temporary confinement before death occurred. Investigators refused to release details publicly, but internally the conclusion shattered earlier assumptions about the timeline. Mercer hadn't acted impulsively. He transported her, kept her somewhere. That realization transformed the entire case from obsession-driven violence into something colder, more organized, more terrifyingly controlled. Morales immediately ordered renewed searches connected to Mercer's former properties, storage units, and work locations. Detectives dug through abandoned maintenance records from the Metropolitan Transportation Authority searching for unused facilities Mercer could access during the early 1990s. Hundreds of possibilities existed across the city's underground infrastructure. Forgotten utility spaces, decommissioned service tunnels, vacant repair sites. New York hid entire worlds beneath its streets. And somewhere inside them, Elena spent her final hours. The revelation reignited fears that Mercer may not have acted alone. Investigators quietly explored whether another transit employee helped conceal evidence or provided access to restricted locations. Most leads collapsed quickly, but suspicion poisoned surviving relationships among retired workers connected to Mercer's old department. Several former colleagues refused interviews entirely. One reportedly left town after detectives contacted him. Then another tape surfaced. Not from police archives. From Bellamy's family. Months after the retired detective's death in 2011, his daughter discovered unlabeled cassette recordings inside storage boxes, but ignored them for years, believing they contained routine work material. After Mercer's arrest dominated headlines, she finally listened. One recording captured Bellamy speaking privately into a handheld recorder in 1997 during his final years investigating the case unofficially.
His voice sounded exhausted.
Frustrated.
Obsessed.
I know he kept her somewhere before the river, Bellamy said into the tape. I can feel it. But every location connected to Mercer disappears into dead paperwork. Missing files. Missing maintenance records. Somebody cleaned the trail. Morales listened repeatedly. Missing records. That detail echoed through her thoughts relentlessly. Because during her own review of transit archives, she noticed unexplained gaps surrounding one abandoned maintenance facility beneath the West Side Rail corridor. Entire months of access logs vanished from storage systems dating back to 1993. At the time, she blamed administrative decay. Now she wasn't so sure. Search warrants arrived within hours. The underground facility sat sealed beneath layers of rusted infrastructure near the Hudson corridor, inaccessible to the public for decades. Detectives entered wearing respirators and floodlights as freezing water dripped through cracked ceiling pipes. Dust coated every surface. Broken machinery lined the walls like skeletons. Most of the site appeared untouched since the early 1990s. Then investigators reached a locked interior room hidden behind maintenance shelving. The padlock was old, but not original. Inside, detectives found a narrow cot, water containers, battered electrical lanterns, and handcuffs bolted directly into concrete. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The room felt frozen in time, preserved by darkness and abandonment. Forensic teams immediately began processing every inch of the chamber while Morales stood motionless near the doorway staring at the restraints attached to the wall. Mercer had prepared this place long before Elena disappeared. That realization changed the emotional gravity of the case completely. The stalking photographs, the rehearsed phone call, the folded coat, the tunnel burial site. None of it was accidental. Mercer built a system inside forgotten corners of New York where routine vanished and people became isolated from the world above. Then forensic analysts uncovered another devastating discovery. Hair samples recovered from the hidden room belonged not only to Elena Navarro but potentially to at least 2 unidentified women. The investigation exploded into panic behind closed doors. If confirmed, it meant Mercer's crimes extended beyond a single cold case buried for 30 years. Detectives reopened missing persons investigations stretching across multiple boroughs while national media speculated endlessly about a possible undiscovered serial predator hiding inside old New York history. And somewhere inside Bellevue Hospital, connected to machines beneath armed guard, Daniel Mercer remained alive.
Silent.
Breathing. Watching investigators uncover the ruins of secrets he had spent half a lifetime trying to bury beneath the noise of the city. By the spring of 2026, New York no longer treated the Navarro case like an old mystery reopened for television headlines. It had become something heavier, darker, more intimate, a wound the city suddenly realized had never healed. Every week brought another revelation pulled from beneath decades of dust and concrete. Another forgotten report. Another erased maintenance file. Another photograph recovered from boxes investigators once believed empty. The deeper detectives dug into Daniel Mercer's past, the more the city seemed to recoil from its own reflection. Because Mercer had not hidden in isolation. He had hidden in plain sight, surrounded by millions of people, protected by routine, invisibility, and the endless noise of New York itself. The underground chamber discovered beneath the West Side corridor remained sealed from the public while forensic teams worked inside day and night. Reporters called it the room beneath the city. Former transit workers refused interviews. Conspiracy theories flooded online forums claiming entire networks of hidden tunnels existed under Manhattan where crimes vanished unnoticed during the violent years of the early 1990s. Most investigators dismissed those stories immediately, but privately, many admitted the city's forgotten infrastructure created terrifying possibilities. Abandoned service corridors stretched for miles beneath streets crowded with ordinary life above. Locked rooms, dead platforms. Maintenance sectors erased from modern maps. Places where screams would never rise high enough to reach daylight. And somewhere inside that darkness, Elena Navarro spent her final hours alive. Detective Lena Morales barely slept anymore. The case had consumed her completely. Apartment lights burned through the night while evidence photographs cover her walls in organized grids. Maps, timelines, transit diagrams, Mercer's routines, Elena's movements. She studied everything, repeatedly searching for the final hidden piece, not merely what Mercer did, but why he stopped after Elena. Because statistically, behavior like his rarely ended cleanly. The hair samples recovered from the underground room suggested additional victims, yet no confirmed matches appeared immediately in national databases. Days passed, then weeks. Then the first identification came back. A 22-year-old college student named Rebecca Vance, missing since 1989 after leaving a music venue in Lower Manhattan. The room inside NYPD headquarters fell silent when the forensic analyst delivered the report. Rebecca's disappearance had remained unsolved for 37 years. Her parents died without answers. And now investigators believed she had been trapped in the same underground chamber years before Elena Navarro ever crossed Mercer's path. The media storm became uncontrollable. Cold case horror expands. Second victim linked to hidden Manhattan chamber. How many more? Families connected to unsolved disappearances across New York began contacting police by the hundreds. Detectives reopened archived files buried so long the paper had turned yellow at the edges. Missing women, transit corridors, nighttime disappearances. Cases originally blamed on random violence, runaway theories, drugs, prostitution, anything convenient enough to close paperwork quickly during a decade when the city drowned in crime faster than investigators could contain it. But one question haunted Morales above all others. Why did Mercer suddenly stop? Rebecca vanished in 1989. Elena disappeared in 1993. Then nothing. No confirmed patterns afterward. No additional linked disappearances. It made no sense. Unless something interrupted him. Morales returned once more to Bellamy's old cassette recording, searching for details overlooked during earlier reviews. Most contained fragmented thoughts, dead-end theories, exhausted speculation spoken into the recorder late at night. But near the end of one damaged tape, Bellamy mentioned another name investigators had largely ignored decades earlier. Anthony DeMarco, former transit supervisor, worked directly above Mercer between 1988 and 1994, retired suddenly, died in 2002. At first the connection appeared ordinary. Then Morales uncovered disciplinary complaints filed against Mercer during the early 1990s that mysteriously vanished from official personnel archives. Bellamy apparently suspected DeMarco removed them personally. The retired detective believed somebody inside the transit system protected Mercer repeatedly after complaints regarding stalking behavior and unauthorized access to restricted underground areas. The implications were explosive. If true, Mercer survived scrutiny not because he was careful alone, but because institutional negligence buried warning signs before anyone recognized the danger. Morales tracked down DeMarco's surviving son in New Jersey. The meeting lasted less than an hour, but changed the investigation permanently. According to him, his father became deeply paranoid during the final years of his life. He drank heavily, slept poorly, locked doors obsessively. One night shortly before his death, DeMarco allegedly confessed something terrifying. There are things under New York that should never be hidden. Then came another revelation. Before retiring, DeMarco mailed a sealed envelope to himself through certified post and never opened it again. After his death, the envelope remained untouched inside family storage boxes for more than 20 years. Inside, investigators found photocopies of internal transit complaints connected to Daniel Mercer. One statement stopped Morales cold. A female employee reported Mercer following her repeatedly through maintenance corridors in 1991. She claimed he became fixated after casual conversations during overnight shifts. Most disturbing of all, she alleged Mercer once attempted guiding her toward an abandoned service platform beneath the West Side Line before another worker unexpectedly interrupted them. The complaint disappeared from official records weeks later. Signed approval for dismissal. Anthony DeMarco. Morales felt physically sick reading it. Mercer could have been stopped years before Elena vanished. Maybe before Rebecca Vance disappeared. Maybe before anyone died at all. Public reaction turned vicious after the documents leaked. Protesters gathered outside transit authority buildings demanding accountability for decades-old failures. Surviving families accused the city of burying danger to avoid scandal during a period already overwhelmed by violence. Former officials denied intentional cover-ups, insisting record-keeping chaos in the early 1990s explained the missing complaints. But nobody believed simple incompetence anymore. Not after the underground chamber. Not after the photographs. Not after the bodies. And still Daniel Mercer remained alive. Barely. Doctors described minimal neurological recovery. He recognized faces inconsistently. Could move one hand slightly. Occasionally mouthed incomplete words impossible to interpret. Prosecutors desperately wanted a final statement before his condition deteriorated permanently. So did Morales. She visited Bellevue repeatedly, hoping some fragment of consciousness still lingered behind his fading expression. During one visit in April, something changed. Mercer looked directly at her. Focused. Aware. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then slowly, painfully, Mercer lifted trembling fingers toward the bedside notepad nurses kept nearby. Morales slid it closer cautiously. His hand shook violently while writing fragmented letters across the page. The pen slipped twice before he finished. 3 words. South Tunnel Gate. That was all. Moments later, he lost consciousness again. Detectives mobilized immediately. Transit engineers identified several possible South Tunnel gates connected to abandoned infrastructure beneath the Hudson Corridor, but one location matched Mercer's historical access permissions from the early 1990s precisely. An unused maintenance sector sealed after flooding damage in 1995. Search teams entered before dawn. The tunnel smelled of stagnant water and rust. Electrical cables hung from ceilings like dead vines while floodlights pushed weak beams through darkness untouched for decades. Morales walked with the first team herself, boots splashing through shallow black water echoing endlessly against concrete walls. Then they found the gate. Heavy steel. Half submerged. Locked from the outside. Forensic crews forced entry carefully. Inside waited another chamber. Smaller than the first. Older. And almost completely empty except for a wooden chair bolted to the floor and dozens of newspaper clippings spread across the walls in decaying layers. Missing persons headlines. Murder reports. Crime statistics. Photographs of terrified families holding pictures of vanished daughters. Mercer had covered the chamber with fear itself, surrounding himself for years with evidence of the city's grief. Then Morales noticed one final detail near the back wall. Words scratched directly into the concrete. The city never looks down. Nobody spoke after reading it. Because it was true. For decades, New York rushed endlessly above hidden darkness without ever seeing what waited beneath its streets. Forensic teams recovered no additional remains from the second chamber, but investigators discovered something else: audio tapes. Hundreds of them stacked inside waterproof containers. Recordings labeled only by dates. When technicians finally restored the first tapes, the horror deepened further. Mercer recorded himself constantly. Walking. Watching crowds. Describing strangers. Sometimes whispering observations for hours while city noise roared around him. Most recordings sounded detached, almost clinical. But certain tapes captured emotional spirals growing increasingly unstable over time. Obsession. Isolation. Rage toward women who ignored him. Fantasies about control. Fear of abandonment. Investigators realized they were listening to the psychological collapse of a predator hidden beneath ordinary life for years. One recording dated October 14, 1993, the night Elena vanished, lasted nearly 47 minutes. Only fragments remained audible through damage and age.
Rain. Traffic.
Footsteps. Mercer speaking softly beside another voice believed to be Elena Navarro. Then one sentence emerged clearly from static near the end of the tape. You made me feel visible. The recording stopped abruptly afterward. No scream. No struggle. Only silence. By summer, prosecutors announced they possessed enough evidence to formally close the Navarro case despite Mercer's inability to stand trial medically. Elena's death was officially ruled homicide. Daniel Mercer named responsible. Rebecca Vance linked conclusively through forensic evidence recovered from the underground chamber. Investigations into additional potential victims continued quietly behind sealed files. But closure never truly arrived. Not for the families. Not for Morales. Not for the city. Because the case exposed something larger than one predator. It revealed how easily people disappeared inside noise, bureaucracy, overcrowded systems, and public exhaustion. Mercer exploited invisibility more than violence. He survived because nobody connected fragments quickly enough. A photograph here, a complaint there, a missing woman swallowed by headlines before the next tragedy replaced her. And in the end, the thing New Yorkers feared most was not the underground chambers or hidden tunnels or forgotten rooms beneath Manhattan. It was the realization that Daniel Mercer walked among millions of people for decades afterward, carrying unbearable secrets behind the face of an ordinary man. No mask, no criminal record, no monster hiding in shadows. Just a quiet old transit worker riding elevators, buying groceries, nodding politely at neighbors while beneath the city, hidden under concrete and steel, the ghosts of forgotten women waited silently in darkness for someone to finally look down.